Transfer portal is officially open. Welcome into the On3 YouTube channel, taking you through Transfer Portal Monday. Today, a lot of the top talent may be staying put, maybe on the move, but keep an eye on the ticker here for everything going on with the portal because a lot of big names have already either entered or announced their intentions to enter. I'm J.D. PicKell. Alongside me, the man, the myth, the legend, Andy Staples. Andy, big day. It feels like the second national signing day with players that are already signed.
This is bigger. This is bigger. I just think about how people treat the opening of free agency in the NFL, the opening of free agency in the NBA. This is free agency on steroids. There are no contracts.
It's a beautiful thing.
They go to the Supreme, they go to court to say these people aren't employees, so you can't have contracts. So what does that mean? Everybody going everywhere willy-nilly.
It's like the Hunger Games. May the odds be ever in your favor.
Listen, they're in Cam Ward's favor and Kyle McCord's favor and in Dillon Gabriel's favor. This is wild.
Absolutely massive. Absolutely massive. A ton to unpack. Like I said, a lot of big names are already seemingly on the move. We anticipate potentially some more movement to be happening with just the craziness that is Portal Monday. We also got the man, Josh Newberg, national recruiting analyst for us here at On3, sitting shotgun. Josh, how we feeling, man? We feeling like we're clocked and locked in with all the craziness about to unfold here?
Yeah, it does kind of have those signing day vibes to it, but it is a little bit bigger of a day, I think, than even signing day because, like Andy said, there's no contracts, nothing's binding, and it's kind of a free-for-all right now.
We also know these guys. Mm-hmm. Like they have performed in college. Mm-hmm. We have an idea of if they're good or not. We have an idea of what level they're good at. And I think people feel not an ownership, but they understand it better. I think sometimes when you're dealing with recruiting, there's a large portion of the casual fan base that says, well, I don't watch all of these guys' high school film. I don't know who's good and who's not. So I'll wait till they get on campus and we'll figure it out. You've now seen a lot of these guys on campus. You know where they fit, and you've thought about, I wonder if he played on my team. What would he look like? And now we can talk about that.
And for these staffs, too, I mean, you're not taking a gamble as much as you are on a high school kid who you're hoping pans out and develops how you want him to. You're like, no, I saw this guy balling against us last year. Now he's in the portal. Maybe we'll add him to our roster, and we'll get the same kind of production out of him. Well, let's kind of set the table here for where we're sitting as it stands right now in Transfer Portal Monday. As of this morning, you pull up Twitter or X, whatever you're calling it right now, Kyle McCord in the portal.
Yes, Pete Nakos reported that, our guy. And this is unbelievable. Kyle McCord was starting against Michigan a week and a half ago, and now he's in the transfer portal. And look, people are going to look at this and everybody's going to say, well, greedy players.
Yeah.
This doesn't sound like this was a Kyle McCord first choice necessarily.
Yeah, I was going to say.
This sounds like Ohio State's looking for a quarterback.
I was going to say, so in that way, do you lean more towards, okay, maybe Ohio State's in the quarterback market?
They're very much in the quarterback.
Brown's still on campus?
Devin Brown's on campus. Aaron Nolan's coming. But it sounds like they are very much in the market for someone. And so does that mean Riley Leonard? Does that mean Will Howard? Does that mean Cam Ward? These are all people, like we're going to hear those names over and over until those people make a decision because those are the most established, most successful quarterbacks in the portal. Dillon Gabriel now goes in. How does Ryan Day feel about lefties?
We're about to find out here, I think.
Because that, soon. Think about with Dillon Gabriel popping into the portal, in that offense, I think he could be good. Now he has not played in that. He played in the Art Briles offense under Josh Heupel at UCF and under Jeff Lebby at Oklahoma. So would he potentially be going to another place that runs a version of that offense? Which Jackson Dart's not going anywhere. So Ole Miss doesn't need it. Philip Montgomery's calling plays at Auburn now. Like
with a track record of working with quarterbacks, and it sounds like with all the Riley Leonard smoke, maybe they're in the market.
Right. Well, Philip Montgomery, if we go back through his history, he was Art Briles' offensive coordinator at Baylor. He ran that offense at Tulsa as the head coach. So you could bring in Dillon Gabriel, and even if Hugh Freeze is doing different things with the offense, you can translate it to him
without question,
very easily,
without question.
And this is a guy who started for 4 years now,
and that's kind of the thing with Kyle McCord. Going back to him, he's a guy like you just said. He was starting against Michigan all of a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
How does something like that happen? Is the thing where if you're Ohio State, you say, okay, we like where this quarterback market is trending towards. Hey, Kyle McCord, just full transparency, we may be headed somewhere else. Or is it a thing where you sit down and say, hey, regardless of what we're going to do going forward, we don't think it's going to be us together. Thank you.
I don't think you just shove him out as a starter. You probably do it more nuanced the first way. But I will say, if you want to look for a potential landing spot for Kyle McCord, Louisville.
Interesting.
Jeff Brom does great things with quarterbacks. Jack Plummer is done, I believe. I believe he's out of eligibility.
Okay.
And you saw him play in the ACC
You never know
championship
now.
game.
We got guys playing 9
Well,
years,
exactly.
10
You
years.
saw him play in the ACC championship game the other night. Louisville definitely wants to upgrade at that position. So Kyle McCord could be the upgrade that they want.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch where a lot of these guys end up. Like you said, Dillon Gabriel intends to enter. Kyle McCord, it sounds like, already is in there. A couple of other big names we should maybe take a look at here when it comes to this whole transfer portal madness, because the way that it works, to my understanding, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong here, if your head coach is fired or you're a graduate, you were able to already enter prior to this.
Right, and that's why. So like Max Johnson, who was at Texas A&M, previously to LSU, but he was at A&M. Jimbo Fisher gets fired. Max Johnson can enter the portal. There's a 30-day window right after the firing that he could enter the portal. And then, of course, the actual portal opens. So he enters the portal earlier than everybody else. He's already committed to North Carolina. Like, he's done. He's wrapped it up.
Finished. He kind of tapped that first domino over when it came to the portal quarterback market. DJ Uyunglele, also in the portal. What are your thoughts on him? Because he was someone that you probably didn't anticipate moving before the Jonathan Smith stuff happened. Where is a fit for someone like DJU?
That's a good question, because you see these big name schools that keep getting thrown out for DJ. I think Florida State's one that keeps getting mentioned. Well, Florida State scouted DJU 3 years in a row. So I would imagine Mike Norvell has a very strong opinion one way or the other on DJ Uyunglele, and I don't know what that is. But I would think the schools of the ACC especially know him very well because of having to scout him when he was Clemson starting quarterback. I am very curious to see how that market develops, because another reason we leave Oregon State now is Oregon State is not a power program anymore. I notice I didn't say Power 5.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
We retired the term Power 5 yesterday when Florida State got left out.
Yep.
We retired the term. It's Power 2, the SEC and the Big Ten, and there's a defined middle class. This is the Big 12 and the ACC. So does he end up at a Big 12 program? Does he end up at a West Coast? I don't think he'd end up at a West Coast-based Big Ten program. I can't see USC taking him.
Oregon got a lot of smoke with his brother there, and Nick's leaving. Like, that probably makes some sense.
Right, and we've seen them work, and they would know him very well. Now, Will Stein, he's not. He wasn't at a school where they played DJ a bunch, but they played him last year. So they should understand kind of where he's at. That one's an interesting one to me, because I don't know that I think they're probably thinking he's going to set the market. He's not the one setting the market. The QBs setting the market right now are Cam Ward and Riley Leonard. And to me, Riley Leonard is the one who should be setting the market. He's the only person who has completely elevated his team. Like, when Duke has a healthy Riley Leonard, they are capable of beating teams they're not normally capable of beating.
And that's 100%. I mean, you just mentioned Riley Leonard kind of setting the market. It sounds like he went in with a do not contact tag. Is that correct? I mean, so what does that mean for those listening at home saying, okay, do not contact? So you're saying you're in free agency. So, hey, don't call me. Don't give me a call.
So here's how that works. Don't call us. We'll call you.
Interesting. Okay.
So I know, this is Riley Leonard saying, I know that I am going to be very valued, potentially the most valued person in this marketplace. And so I am going to dictate who because and it needs to be like that for someone at his level, because you look at these stories of like a Johnny Cornelius last year leaving Rhode Island, the offensive tackle, and those types of players who they don't really know what the market is yet, and they find out when their phone melts the first day because so many people are calling them. With Riley Leonard, he doesn't need that. He knows who would want him, and he knows where he'd want to play. So he's gonna have his people. And they listen, at the top level, they have agents, just like an NFL player would have an agent. So his agent is going to call and say, I'm just hypothetically here, and because we know they're talking to Notre Dame, but call Notre Dame and say, all right, Riley is interested in hearing what you guys have to say. Can we set up a visit? How do we do this? And then you could do the same with the other schools that would be on his short list. Now, if you didn't get enough action out of that, which won't be a problem for him, you could just say, contact me. But I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think that they're going to get plenty of action.
I was going to say, because I think a lot of people saw Riley Leonard enter the portal and then see things with Notre Dame being linked to him and say, okay, well, done deal. He's just already, signed, sealed, delivered. Not the case. It's going to be like a whole sweepstakes, it sounds like.
Well, right. And he could have, it's interesting because his coach left Duke for Texas A&M. But I think Mike Elko went to A&M. Now, remember, Mike Elko had been at A&M and understood the roster there. And I think he looked at it and said, you know what? We're going to roll with Connor Wigman here. We're good here with Connor Wigman. So that wasn't going to be an option. But Auburn is another one that has come up for Riley Leonard. And so this gives him a chance to really control his own destiny here, control this process, which can get out of hand and quickly. I mean, because, and that's what happens when a lot of these guys enter the portal. When, let's say, you're an all Sun Belt or all Mountain West offensive lineman and you enter the portal, you may not realize how coveted you're going to be.
No, I mean, it really is ridiculous, especially if you're a quarterback. And there's somebody we didn't even get to, Grayson McCall, a guy who I know is attracting a lot of attention. Dante Moore we'll talk about here in a second. But the quarterbacks, they get all the shine, right? We just spent the first 10 minutes talking about Cam Ward, Riley Leonard, Dillon Gabriel, Kyle McCord. How about some non-quarterbacks? Joey Slackman. Defensive lineman from Penn. 17 offers in one day.
Let's talk Ivy League.
How about it?
Ivy League, bro.
How about it?
Well, Joey Slackman and Thor Griffith from Harvard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so
a bench press fiend was on your show.
That's right. He does not get bored doing 45 reps of 225 on the bench press. But this is a case, and you can explain, because the Ivy League saw a big wave going in last week. You can explain where they come from because their rules are different there, and it causes some of these older guys to look differently at entering the NFL versus entering the portal.
Absolutely. It's a little bit tricky because typically you see a lot of these guys at other schools that aren't at the Ivy League, and they say, okay, great, I have another year of eligibility. I get a nice little masters out of this. Might stay an extra year. At the Ivies, they say, no, you get undergrad and that's it. So if you want to compete for a fifth season, there is no developmental redshirt, meaning you have to unenroll for a semester, which if you're not on scholarship, which the Ivies don't
None
offer,
of them are,
incredibly inconvenient for your life. So guys do it. They'll unenroll and find a job in your local college town and figure out a way to get back for that next fall. But most of the guys that can play somewhere else, like a Joey Slackman, who just blew up in the portal and had 17 offers in one day, he said, you know what? Maybe I want to test the waters. Maybe I want to have a chance to go do something after college that doesn't have to do with Wall Street, using whatever, kind of degree he got from Penn. And so now he's in the portal. And we got some movement here. Josh Newberg is keeping us up to date with everything going on in the portal. Josh, we got some action, brother. What's going on?
Yeah, Pete Nako's working the phones this morning. Sources have confirmed to On3 that Florida State, Miami, Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, Wisconsin, and USC have all emerged as names to watch through quarterback Cam Ward's portal recruitment. So Cam Ward's recruitment is heating up, according to Pete Nakos.
Wow. Very curious. Ohio State in that mix on the heels of the Kyle McCord saga. Any other schools, though, that you think?
Can I tell you where he should go?
Please tell me where he should go.
Okay, Cam Ward's an air raid quarterback. He started at Incarnate Word playing for Eric Morris, who is a former Texas Tech receiver, played with Kingsbury, played for Mike Leach, worked for Mike Leach. Like, we're a pure air raid here, okay? He goes to Washington State when Eric Morris goes there as offensive coordinator. Eric Morris leaves Washington State, becomes the head coach at North Texas. But the air raid is not as popular an offensive scheme in college football as it used to be. There was a time when everybody in the Big 12 ran it. It's not like that anymore. That Art Briles Baylor offense has become the one that is the flavor of the month right now. Now, that's one where you can move a quarterback from one to the other, and they can function in both, but there's a learning curve there. If Cam Ward would like to go somewhere where there's no learning curve whatsoever, now it would take this coach wanting him, but he might. It would be USC. Lincoln Riley runs the air raid. Now, he has added some things onto it. He's made his own flavor of air raid, but the base foundation of that offense is exactly what Cam Ward already knows. The other one I would say on this list where he would be very comfortable immediately is Phil Longo's offense at Wisconsin.
I was about to ask about that.
That would be the other one and they would know him. They played him this year. They went and lost in Pullman to Washington State. So that's the one that I don't think they didn't get what they wanted out of Tanner Mordecai. You get Cam Ward, you have someone who can capably run this offense. Now, if you don't run the air raid, you got to make sure he's somebody whose tools will fit you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a scouting thing. But the problem, and this is another thing with the portal, this all happens so fast. Now, Cam Ward's a little bit different animal because with Cam Ward, people have known for weeks that he's entering the transfer portal. So a lot of these schools that might be interested in him have done their homework on Cam Ward.
Yeah.
And have decided, okay, we think from a skill set standpoint, he can work in our offense. But that's something you have to take into consideration when you're doing a 1-year rental on a guy, because if he doesn't, you've just wasted your money. So for Cam Ward, if I were advising him, if USC or Wisconsin comes up with the right deal for you, go to USC or Wisconsin, because it is the offense you're already comfortable in.
And USC is so fascinating because there's a report from Derek Young from On3 saying, well, hey, Will Howard actually is getting a visit from Lincoln Riley in Manhattan, Kansas.
Yeah.
I mean, so how do you go about sorting that out, Andy, where you have two really capable quarterbacks and Will Howard is getting visits from Lincoln Riley, Cam Ward, it sounds like, is in the mix. Like, how do you go about sorting, hey, we want both of y'all, but we also want a decision here rather quickly, you would imagine?
Well, Will Howard's in a different situation as well. And that's the thing. You have to examine everybody's individual situation. So the situation for Will Howard right now is he is still considering going to the NFL. He's sitting there waiting to find out, am I going to get an invitation to the Senior Bowl? I think they have one quarterback slot left. And remember, juniors can now be in the Senior Bowl. So if a big name junior, like, I don't know, JJ McCarthy or somebody like that says, I'm going pro, well, I think the NFL teams want to see him.
Yeah.
But if he's not going to go pro, if Carson Beck's not going to go pro, then you'd want to see Will Howard. Yeah. And Will Howard has to decide soon, do I want to engage in this transfer market or do I want to go pro? And so he's trying to do both right now and keep his options open. That window is going to close at some point. So he's got to figure out what he wants to do. But if we're talking about quarterbacks in the portal who have accomplished quite a bit, who have led he led his team to a Big 12 title.
Yes. Played a lot of football. Yeah. Played 4 years of football. I think he started north of 20 games.
Yeah, he started games as a true freshman. And then he had the platoon system with Adrian Martinez, and then he took over. You had the weird deal where they were playing Avery Johnson every other series for a minute during this season, which I think is probably part of the reason why he's looking around. But he's a guy, I think, if you're looking for a veteran leader, winner who does elevate his team's play, that's one you would want to look at.
And it's one of those things, too. If you're Will Howard, it feels like to me maybe where he transfers for his NFL prospects is potentially more important. Because if you're Cam Ward, there's obviously a good idea of what he was at Washington State. But for Will Howard, having played at Kansas State, that offense doesn't really showcase his skill set maybe quite as much as a Cam Ward was able to do at Washington State. Is it more important for him for his NFL prospects to pick the right spot?
Yeah, I think that's probably how he's looking at it. He's probably looking at it like, which is going to make me look the best to the NFL folks? Because let's be real here. If he's in college next year, it's because he didn't get the Senior Bowl invite, which the way that works is not necessarily just the Senior Bowl staff going, we like this guy, we don't like this guy. The Senior Bowl staff is being asked by various NFL personnel, to, general managers, coaches, that sort of thing. They'll tell them, we want to see this person. We're intrigued by this person. We need to see this person.
This is what we'd like to see on the menu.
Exactly. So like Joe Milton, Senior Bowl, because the NFL people want to see Joe Milton. Like, you guys who are watching this as college football fans are like, I know what Joe Milton is. Yeah. I saw him at Michigan and Tennessee. I know exactly what Joe Milton. But the NFL people look at all the physical attributes and they're like, wait, how can that guy put up those numbers? And we need to see it in person.
What's this all about?
Exactly. So that's what Will Howard's dealing with right now. And so, yes, if he stays in college, I think the most logical thing for him to do is play in an offense that would allow him to showcase more of that drop back skill set. But let's be real here. He's a very good runner. And you need if you're someone who has an offense where a dual threat quarterback can shine, he can go shine there.
Might not be a bad spot. And one of those schools that wasn't on the list for a Cam Ward, and to my knowledge, not being tied to Will Howard at this point in time, is a school that may potentially be in the transfer portal quarterback market, given the exodus of Dante Moore. Sounds like he's going to be on the move here, leaving UCLA. So he's a guy that was so high profile out of high school, 5-star kid. He was committed to Oregon at one point in time, flips late before signing day to UCLA, wants to play early, gets his chance as a true freshman, doesn't probably go exactly how he wanted. How do you see Dante Moore and where he could end up? Because he's a guy who still has a ton of upside, really highly recruited, but now having not had the freshman year he wants, where does he fit?
I just mentioned JJ McCarthy. If he leaves, and look, I know Michigan fans are like, hey, he's not leaving. J.J. McCarthy is very intriguing to NFL people.
Yeah.
He's a big skill set. What Jim Harbaugh has said time after time about J.J. McCarthy, about how he's the most dynamic quarterback he's had, it's all true. And so the idea of J.J. McCarthy going to the NFL is not that far-fetched. And so if you're Michigan, go get Dante Moore. Now, if I'm Jonathan Smith, who just landed at Michigan State, I am all in trying to, because remember, and if you look, it certainly looks like Michigan State has been clearing the decks. Noah Kim, transfer portal. Caden Hauser just went in the portal
Before we got on the air.
This morning.
Wild,
So Michigan State is going to be starting a transfer portal quarterback unless they're starting a true freshman they just signed. If I'm Dante Moore, I'm intrigued because that's a chance to start at a Big Ten program right now. Now, if JJ's gone, Michigan's an opening too.
Might not be a bad spot. And a kid obviously being from the state of Michigan. And
exactly.
It seems like for a lot of these guys that do hit the portal, we always try and guess like, hey, where are they headed? Yeah. And so it feels like to me, whenever someone jumps in the portal, the first place, you look is, okay, well, where are they from? They probably want to get back home, especially someone who just went so far from home to UCLA.
But the thing, I don't know if that necessarily matters as much with some of the quarterbacks, because the way quarterback growing up works now is you've got your private trainer who might be somebody who lives near you, but it might be somebody halfway across the country that you go fly and see. And you're going to all these camps, you're meeting all these people from different places. I don't know that necessarily being right next to where you grew up is as important to those guys as it used to be.
That's interesting.
But I think that depends on the person. Some people just like mom's home cooking.
Yeah, who can blame them? And I think that's a really interesting point when it comes to the quarterback position, because fit is so crucial at that spot, more so than maybe any other position in college football. You can be a defensive lineman, and obviously depth is a piece of that. I mean, who your position coach is a piece of that, but you can probably be successful, relatively speaking, anywhere you go. Whereas with a quarterback, takes the right offense, takes the right head coach, takes the right coordinator, play call, like all those things that go into play are just so fascinating. And so Dante Moore, anywhere you're looking specifically outside of those Michigan schools?
Those are the two that just pop.
Oregon maybe comes up.
But Oregon
there at one point.
Right, because Oregon, he was committed there. He flipped to UCLA. You look at what they did with Bo Nix, and you think, well, that would be awesome if they could do that with me.
Yeah.
And they're going to put good players around you. Like Oregon is going to recruit at a very high level in the Big Ten. You understand you're going to have a very good offensive line in front of you. That's the one thing at UCLA. Chip Kelly, other than Dante Moore, has not really waded into the pool of recruiting top 100 type players. That's not what he does. And if you're going into the Big Ten and you've got to play Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, you need those guys.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's another thing is when it comes to the transfer portal, there's the high school level and then there's the portal level. And it feels like, Andy, we're getting more and more into an era where you have to do both to some degree.
Right.
And you talk to so many people in this world. Is there a common denominator or maybe a common theme that we're starting to see across the board now? It's different for first-year coaches that are trying to turn over the roster and win right away. But is there an overall thought process as it comes to approaching the portal in college football across coaches?
I think the smartest way, and if you look at the teams that compete for national championships, they have some things in common. Their offensive linemen typically are people they recruited out of high school and grew up. Their defensive linemen, for the most part, are people they took out of high school and grew up. They are plugging in the occasional skill guy. They're plugging in the occasional DB, and then quarterback obviously is one where you're open to going to the transfer portal. But let's look at Alabama. Last year they had Tyler Steen at left tackle, who was a transfer. Yeah. But this year it's Caden Proctor, true freshman who they signed out of high school. And that group is guys they took from high school. Their D-line, guys they took from high school. Georgia, same thing. They're not as interested. It's not that they're not interested. They're getting the best raw material out of high school already. And so they don't feel like they need to go get those guys in the portal. Plus, those guys tend to not be as available.
Yeah.
The big guys, I don't know what it is, if big guys are just more loyal. Big guys don't like to move. Moving sucks.
Moving's awful.
Let's be real.
Nobody's a fan of moving.
So, if you're a big dude, you don't want to be loading all your crap into a U-Haul. And so, but I do think there is something to that, is just the bigger bodied players, for whatever reason, are not as active in the transfer portal.
Which is ironic, because talking to people that are in that coaching world, at least last cycle, if a big person does hit the portal, whether it's offensive or defensive
Well,
lineman,
there's-
especially
yeah.
offensive lineman, the value is just sky high.
Yeah, and
why is that?
Supply
Because
curve.
there's less of
It's
those.
this supply curve.
Interesting,
That's why.
okay.
And so I think you are going to see more good group of 5 starting offensive linemen who test the waters
Mhm.
and see, can I get some money? Can I go to a school that maybe I always dreamed of going to, but didn't get recruited by out of high school? That you'll see a lot more of that. And it's definitely worth it for them. It's a great way to, one, financially get yourself a little bit more set up, get more exposure and better competition as you try to make it to the NFL. But also, it may just come down to when you were 8 years old, you wanted to play in that big old stadium.
Want to wear that logo, want to run out of that tunnel. Very fascinating because everybody, it seems like, has their own specific reasons for their own situation as to why they do hit the portal. And it sounds like right now, potentially, Walter Nolan intends to enter the transfer portal from A&M. Another high-profile guy that quarterbacks just stole the shine at the start of this show, Andy. Walter Nolan was a 5-star in the 2022 class. Overall thoughts on him and what he could be going forward, and maybe just his plans overall?
Potentially the most valuable non-quarterback in the portal. We'll see who else goes in. But this is a ready-made defensive lineman who can start for you right now. He has all the tools. He can be a first-round draft pick. He's not ready to be right now. He needs to get in better shape. His work habits need to get better from talking to the people at Texas A&M. But all the tools are there. Like, Texas A&M didn't want to lose Walter Nolan. It's not like they're talking crap on the way out of town.
Yeah.
Like, they wanted him. They believe he is potentially a great game-changing type player. And somebody's going to get a good one.
Yeah.
But somebody's going to have to pay up to get a good one, because this is, again, the supply curve and the demand curve. It's where they meet. Right now, the supply of what Walter Nolan gives you, he's it.
And I think everybody sees someone transfer from A&M and they say, oh, bad culture. Oh, that NIL check bounced. Oh, like they have just so many built-in reasons as to why a player transfers from Texas A&M. But Walter Nolan wasn't a part of that first wave of transfer guys from his class that left. This seems like a different situation from the outside looking in.
Well, I think this is more like a Bear Alexander situation last year, where Bear Alexander was at Georgia. Now, the difference is Bear might not have been a star at Georgia this year. He might have been kind of in the rotation, which is, we've seen that happen from Georgia before. We saw it with Jermaine Johnson when he went to Florida State, where he wanted to be an every down guy and show what he could do. With Bear, I think it was financially a better deal, and he got to show what he could do getting more playing time. Walter's not that case. Walter would get plenty of playing time at Texas A&M. This is a matter of, I can be the most sought after guy in the portal.
It's hard to blame him for a guy of his caliber, kind of like you said with Riley Leonard entering the portal with a do not contact tag. I'm not saying that Walter Nolan has that same tag to him when he does get in there, but just the overall thought process of, hey, I can show up to the dance and be the prettiest girl, has to be kind of attractive. Are we going to see more of that this portal cycle, or do you think these collectives are going to have a barricade setup of, hey, we're going to make sure you stay on this roster?
I think the good collectives will. The good collectives are going to identify who has been producing on our own roster, because those are the most important people to pay.
Yeah.
The most important people to pay are not high school kids that you don't know are going to be good or not. They are players who have been on your roster and who have been successful on your team, and are very additive. And that's the thing. Florida State has been the best at figuring out who matters in this whole process and who doesn't. So, because all of these players will go to the collective and say, well, if you don't goose it up a little bit, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Florida State's been great at, when the player's really good, they're like, okay, we'll take care of you.
Yeah.
And when the player has been replacement level, I'm like, bye.
It really
Good
has
to see
turned into that kind of world in college football where there's obviously a super personal element to it, as there is in any business.
Yeah.
But to that same token, it is a business. And if you want to compete at the highest level and be a successful business, you got to have the right people in place.
If you don't have someone evaluating from a football standpoint for your collective, you're failing as a collective. Like, it's the same thing. Like, if you run a sports agency, you have to have good evaluators. If you don't, you're going to pick the wrong people. And the collective, listen, they've made it where the rules have changed. So they've knocked down the walls considerably between the school and the collective. So the school scouting department is obviously guiding the collective in some way, shape, or form. But the collective people they need to understand, don't fall in love with somebody because you watched one high school highlight tape. Like, go to the football people who know football and say, is this person worth paying to keep? Is this person worth paying to go get?
Okay.
Because it's just like the NFL, where you have an owner who is really impulsive. Like, remember when Al Davis was alive? When Darius Hayward-Bay ran his 40 at the combine, like, you knew Al Davis was going to overdraft him. You already knew it. So you have to avoid being that. You have to have a good, reliable scouting department that evaluates people well, so you don't overpay or let somebody walk who you should have kept.
Without question. And we'll get to a little bit more on how you scout the portal effectively and how Florida State is absolutely crushing in that department here in just a little bit. But let's sort of reset the table here, Andy, because there's been so much going on when it comes to the transfer portal window and how it sort of evolved. As we sit right now, kind of explain to the people what they need to know for this transfer portal world we're living in right now.
All right. Well, what you need to know is the transfer portal sounds like something out of Star Trek.
Yep.
What it is an online spreadsheet. It is basically players saying, I would like to have the opportunity to go to another school. Mm-hmm. Other schools, I'm available. And we talked about the no contact tag. That's rare. Most of them are saying, please, by all means, contact me. I would like to know.
Call me
if you're interested.
Yeah.
And we talk about the portal as if that was the big change. All that was a way to organize this particular set of information. Mm-hmm. What changed that made this really interesting is a few years ago when they said you don't have to sit out a year when you transfer as an undergraduate. You get one transfer where you can just transfer and play immediately. And so that's what changed everything. That's when everybody supercharged the portal. And so basically guys who either they got to a school, it was not what they thought, or they blew up and now they feel like they can do better, they're going to the portal.
Yeah.
It's still more people who couldn't play at the level they were than people who are really good and trying to upgrade. But we're talking mostly about the people who are trying to upgrade or who are just trying to go parallel because they don't like the situation they're in.
Absolutely. And quarterbacks specifically finding themselves in a better situation, better offense, better coordinator. Maybe just they want to follow a coordinator. I mean, I don't think we've seen more impact at any position felt across the college football landscape than the quarterback position.
Well,
I mean, let's just talk about that.
We know why. There's one quarterback on every team. Like, if you're an offensive lineman and you don't win the left tackle job, you can win the right tackle job.
Yep.
If you're a linebacker and you're not the starting Sam linebacker, you might be the starting Will linebacker. Like, there's still a place for you on the team and on the field, more importantly. If you're a quarterback and you don't win the job, you're either changing positions or you're going somewhere else. And for most of these guys, and we talked about the world of growing up quarterback these days, like, if you're a quarterback in 2023 who is being recruited by colleges or who was on scholarship at a college, your parents have dumped so much money into your training over the last 10 years. They are going to make damn sure they get something out of their investment.
Yeah, and who can blame them? I mean, when you look at the transfer portal quarterback world today, or look at the quarterback world today, rather, across college football, take a look at some of these names. Like, it feels like it is becoming more and more rare for a top quarterback to not be a portal guy. I mean, Quinn Ewers, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Sam Hartman from this past cycle, Shedeur Sanders from this past cycle.
Let's look at the Heisman Trophy. Like, the three quarterbacks who are competing, probably, I think they'll be the top three vote getters. We'll find out. The voting closes today, but I think Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. will be the top three vote getters in the Heisman Trophy race. All three of them transferred.
Yeah.
All three of them.
It's unbelievable. And I mean, even when it comes to the college football playoff, you got two of those four teams with Quinn Ewers at Texas and Michael Penix at Washington being transfer portal guys. We'll talk about the playoff here a little bit more in a second, but we talked about the portal market quite a bit when it comes to the quarterbacks that are available or going to be available. Yeah. Who in your mind is potentially like this year's Sam Hartman, like the guy that can plug and play and be someone that elevates your team to, 1 to 2 more wins than you would have had the season before?
He's leaving the same conference.
Yep.
And maybe going to the same team. Riley Leonard.
Okay.
That's the plug and play guy.
Interesting.
He is the plug and play guy. Although Cam Ward, again, if you already run an air raid, he's a very easy plug and play for you as well. That's why if Cam Ward winds up at USC, I find that very intriguing. If Cam Ward winds up at Wisconsin, I find that very intriguing because I think he's such a scheme fit for them. Riley Leonard is a guy who elevates the guys he's playing around. That's what Notre Dame wants. That's what Auburn needs. That's what everybody needs that. Let's be real here. But Riley Leonard is one who I feel like just makes everybody around him better. When he was healthy, Duke could beat teams that they couldn't normally beat.
A guy who's kind of become under the radar, who I'm curious to see where he lands, because Andy, I'm going down on the Tyler Van Dyke ship if it does go down, because I saw him in 2021, rookie of the year in the ACC. Dude is slinging the pill all over the yard under Rhett Lashley. I still am not convinced that he just can't play football. He's had 3 different coordinators in 3 years.
No,
is he a guy that you're watching could be a plug and play and just elevate some team tremendously? And we're like, oh, hey, Tyler Van Dyke's back. How did that feel?
Absolutely. This is a guy who you put him in the right place, and all of a sudden he's going to be pretty good. Now, Miami looked at it, decided Emory Williams was their guy, a guy they signed last year out of high school. And so Tyler Van Dyke needed to go look around. I would say, so his best success is in Rhett Lashley's offense. Now, Rhett Lashley still has Preston Stone.
Stud.
At SMU. So I don't think that's really the option. But Gus Malzahn, John Rice Plumlee, if he's done,
could be interesting.
Get the OG of that offense. Like you came up under Rhett Lashley, but Gus is the OG of that offense. Rhett Lashley was Gus's high school quarterback. So that the people who run that offense should be very interested in Tyler Van Dyke.
Could be the right fit
because you've seen him succeed in it.
Interesting. I mean, we're talking about Auburn too a second ago with Riley Leonard being in there potentially, in the sweepstakes for him. Grayson McCall, a guy who's the 3-time Sun Belt Player of the Year, who dipped his toe in the portal last year, and there was a ton of smoke around, hey, he's Auburn's guy. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And then on the 1-yard line, seems like it fell apart, whether it was academic or administrative, whatever it ended up being. Is he someone you're watching for Auburn this time around, fitting in that Hugh Freeze, Philip Montgomery
system? It
system?
Sounds like NC State's the one to beat for
staying home
for them.
Yeah.
So that would be an interesting one too, because when we saw MJ Morris enter the portal today out of NC State, which that was a strange situation where MJ Morris started some games as a true freshman in 2022, and then they recruited over him, took Brennan Armstrong as a transfer. Then Brennan Armstrong plays poorly. They make MJ Morris play. He goes 3-1 as a starter and wins some pretty big games. And then then MJ Morris is like, okay, I'm going to redshirt now because you told me I was going to redshirt this season.
Yeah.
And you knew that meant he was going to enter the portal. He is entering the portal. I can see Grayson McCall going to NC State, which has been a very, Dave Doran's team has just been solid every year.
Yep.
They've never been particularly great, but they've always been solid. Perhaps Grayson McCall can elevate them. Now, Grayson dealt with injuries this year. He was playing in a different offense at Coastal under Tim Beck than he played in with Jamie Chadwell. But Tim Beck was the OC at NC State. So the people at NC State are going to understand the offense that he's coming from.
Kind of fitting that puzzle piece, if you will, when it comes to what
and then the next domino is, okay, so where's MJ Morris go?
Yes, it really is. It does feel like it's a poor comp because I talk so much about conference realignment being like musical chairs, but it feels like to me the transfer portal quarterback market is musical chairs. The music is going, and you better have a chair by the time you sit down, because there's going to be somebody you would imagine that gets left, maybe not out of this thing, but where, a situation that they would rather not have been in when it comes to where they end up landing.
Absolutely. And you just get these weird situations where sometimes 2 quarterbacks that started against each other just flip-flop.
Yep.
It's a very weird deal. And right now, if I am a quarterback in the portal, I'm looking at scheme. I'm looking hard at scheme, because if you go to a place that's not necessarily a scheme fit for you, you're not going to start. Or you're going to get there and it's going to be a tough transition. And somebody who's been there out of high school might. The other thing is, we look at the Mac Jones situation. Some of these other quarterbacks who stayed, Kyle Trask at Florida, who stayed instead of transferring when everybody else transferred. Sometimes that's the last man standing.
Yeah.
And so I will caution some of these guys who are entering the portal and say, if you are the backup quarterback at a big-time school and are well-liked, you get along with the OC, remember, you are one injury away from being the starter at that big time school.
Maybe that collective is taking care of you just enough to,
Exactly.
pay the
So
bills, go out to dinner now
you
and
might be in a
then.
better position than you realize.
It is. The grass is always greener, which I think is what we're seeing show itself very much so when it comes to the transfer portal. And let's kind of take a look at how the transfer portal impacted this past season in college football. And I don't think there was a game you can point to more definitively than the Clemson-Florida State game.
Yes.
Where you had Florida State having a portal quarterback throw it to a portal receiver to win the game. Then you got Clemson, who just crosses their arms every offseason and says, nope, we're not doing it.
Oh, no, they're
We're
portaling
not
this
doing
season.
A Division II
Shorter
player,
college,
right? There we
baby.
go. Okay, so maybe they're just dipping their toe in after seeing that whole thing happen to them at home against Florida State. Andy, just in terms of maybe just winners and losers across the board, Florida State obviously being a big winner, we'll talk about more, but the portal's impact on this past season in college football.
Well, it's interesting because we have to look at different seasons in the portal to say who won. Like, for example, when LSU took Jaden Daniels out of the portal, did you envision this?
I did not after last year.
I sure as hell
But
didn't
after
either.
the season, they threw for 80-something yards against, I believe it was, I'm going to miss the SEC team, but not looking phenomenal every single season.
Right. Jaden Daniels didn't really show you what he could be from a passing standpoint in year one at LSU until the Florida game, which was later in the season. And so that you have to say the transfer portal. I would say LSU is a great example of how the transfer portal can impact you positively and negatively. Like when they changed coaching staffs, when they fired Ed Orgeron's staff, they did a bad job of trying to keep DBs they had on the roster who would have been good. They should have kept more of those. And they wound up in a bad spot, a position that they always were loaded at before.
At DBU.
Yeah, but they're not right now. And they're trying to chase through the portal, and they're not doing a great job of it. But Jaden Daniels, Logan Diggs, that's a pretty good couple portal pickups for you.
Not a bad spot to be sitting.
And your offense was awesome. Now, is their offense that awesome without Will Campbell, who they recruited out of high school, Malik Neighbors, who they recruited out of high school, Brian Thomas Jr., who they recruited out of high school,
Mason Taylor.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's got to be a mix of the two. It cannot just be guys out of the portal if you really want to be successful, as LSU's learned. Like if you'd had some homegrown corners, we're talking about them as a potential SEC champion, not as a team that had a great offense and a horrible defense.
Yeah, and a team that's on the outside looking in when it comes to that SEC title race, even though they were in Atlanta a season ago.
Yeah.
Another team that I think is interesting to look at because they were so active in the portal once Lincoln Riley got there. But USC, copy and paste a quarterback in Caleb Williams. You win the Heisman Trophy. You only have one loss in the regular season a year ago. And then you kind of fast forward the tape, and it just felt off. And you can point to coaching staff. I don't know if you point to culture. Like I think a lot of people are searching for answers right now in LA. But you look at what they did through the portal, and it feels like, Andy, defensively, they upgraded talent-wise by a pretty sizable margin, getting Bear Alexander, getting Anthony Lucas. They had a bunch of dogs that they got through the portal, but still struggled. What do you attribute that to, and why are they losing in that sense?
Well, that's also bad coaching.
Yeah.
And remember, Alex Grinch probably should have been let go a year earlier. We'll see what D'Anton Lynn does at USC. Now, I think a lot of it's philosophical with Lincoln Riley. He's got to get that part fixed. And that also is something you got to look at in the portal. Like, because I think there's some people out there who are saying, I want to take the biggest bag. Do not take the biggest bag at the expense of you being a great player next year.
Yeah.
Because you being a great player next year for a little bit less money is going to make you more money in the long run. That's the part that a lot of these guys miss when they're out there just looking. Like for Bear Alexander, there are a lot of places he could have gone that maybe did not offer what USC offered, but he would have had a better year. He was good for USC. But imagine if he was good in a good defense.
Able to get developed to the nth degree and set himself up for maybe some NFL.
Now, I know what you're going to say. You could just stay at Georgia and do that.
Could stay at Georgia and do that. Seems like it works out okay for a lot of those defensive linemen that end up staying.
But imagine he'd been at LSU, or imagine he'd been at like somewhere like or Missouri, somewhere like that, playing alongside some really good play. Like you plug him in. Now, Missouri had a really good defensive line anyway, but plug that dude in with Ladarius Perkins on a defense that has corners like Chris Abrams-Drain and Ennis Rakestraw. Well, you're gonna eat.
You're gonna be able to eat and eat greedy.
But it's not as flashy, and I'm sure because Missouri's another one that I think has done really well with NIL. They've done well on the parts out of high school, and they've done well on keeping their best players there. But that's one that when somebody enters the portal like that, they're not thinking about a school like that, even though that's maybe where they probably should be thinking of.
And you mentioned flash, Andy, when you talk about USC. I mean, another school, and I think it still seems a little bit murky to me, at least what they're doing in the NIL space. But Deion Sanders has come out and said, hey, we're not an ATM. You're going to come and play here and you're going to do things our way. But Deion Sanders, it felt like was the face of the transfer portal for a minute there. I mean, saying, hey, I'm bringing in my Louis luggage. This is how we're going to do things. We're going to upgrade the roster. I mean, they brought in 50 guys and 56 guys transferred out. Talk about Deion Sanders a little bit and just what he's done to this year, because it feels like they kind of were the guinea pig, if you will, on, okay, first-year coach, won one game a season ago. We're going to have to redo the entire roster. Like, let's find a way to make this thing happen here. This whole thing is interesting. With
that one
Colorado.
is interesting, too, because so the people who came with Deion as undergrad transfers can't go anywhere now unless they want to sit out a year. Now, some of those, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, of course they're not going anywhere. But, like, what about the offensive lineman who he was talking about replacing? Okay, you can try to replace them, but who's going to come to you if you just cast those other guys aside and now they're stuck and have to go sit a year somewhere? Like, they're not – nobody good is going to come to you if that's how you're going to handle it.
And I think everybody got to see the hit rate when it came to the transfer portal. Like, hey, Travis Hunter, obviously he is a stud. Shedeur Sanders did a lot of great things. Then across the board, you only hear about the guys that worked out, for the most part, at least for casual college football fans. There's a lot on Colorado's roster they transferred in that did not translate how they thought it would. And that's the reason why they had the season they did.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of – if they thought they were going to have an effective offensive or defensive line building it through the transfer portal, they were eating mushrooms or something, because everybody knows you can't do that. Everybody knows that doesn't work. You can plug and play one guy.
Yeah.
You can't build entire lines through the portal. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so that's the part that those of us who cover this sport were saying all year or all offseason is, okay, what happens when everybody realizes they can't block? And that's what happened. And Deion realizing he couldn't block way too late was another problem. Like, when you demote Sean Lewis, whose offense allows you to hide your inability to block, and replace him with Pat Shurmur, who comes from the NFL, where all of those offenses require you to be able to block, it shows a lack of understanding of how you do things through the portal.
And that's kind of my question, is because it seems like right now, if you're Deion Sanders, you had the momentum early on, but where do you go from here? Because you demote an offensive coordinator who then takes a head coaching job. Right. So that tells you what everybody else thought about your offensive coordinator. And there's kind of this roster space maybe you don't have. The NCAA is cracking down on portal moves. Like, there's so much going on within this that makes me feel like they're not just dysfunctional. They're a little bit stuck, it feels like, Andy.
They are very stuck.
Yeah.
And this is the part, because he was talking the other day about how it's all part of the plan. No, the plan didn't work. And now you are stuck because you're going to go get more players out of the portal. It's still the same problem. And you've just admitted your NIL doesn't have much money. Like, your collective doesn't have much money.
Yeah.
So that's what that whole "we're not an ATM" thing was. When a coach says we're not an ATM, you're coming here for a degree. Whether it's Deion or anybody else, that means our collective is basically broke. That is what that is code for.
That's tough.
The schools that have really effective collectives, they're like, oh, we're just, we're looking around and we're going to evaluate and see who's a good fit. That's all they say. They don't complain about it at all because they know they've got the money to pay for it.
It's like that one friend that says, no, I can't go out to eat tonight. I'm gonna try and cook at home. I make a great meal at home. I'm gonna stay home and cook tonight. Exactly. A great way to kind of get a gauge for that there when it comes to coach speak. Hey, we got some news here from the man, the myth, the legend, Josh Newberg. Josh, you got some action here on Portal Monday. What's going on?
Yeah, some clarity on somebody that you've been talking a lot about, Texas A&M defensive lineman Walter Nolan. There's a report from Steve Wiltfong of 24/7 Sports that says the Aggies are still in it, and according to his father, they're meeting with him today to try to keep him away from other programs. So we'll see what happens there.
So
interesting.
I have talked to somebody at A&M today. I would be surprised if he came back.
Interesting.
To A&M.
Okay.
I would be very surprised. I think Tennessee is the one to beat here.
And when you say you'd be surprised about him going back to A&M, that's an NIL thing, that's a fit thing, or what would you attribute that to?
I just think there's going to be a lot of bidders in the marketplace. Now, what's interesting with Texas A&M, And we'll see if this happens. This is not something that's happened yet, but I think with some of these players who were very highly touted recruits who went to A&M, who signed NIL deals, the collective bought their NIL rights, lock, stock, and barrel. They own their NIL rights. If you would like to go somewhere else, the thought is the collective will just say, oh, you're of no use to us here because the deal is with this school. So we just release you from this. They don't have to. There's no rule that says you have to release them. So it's just a contract. So theoretically, the collective could send a notice to the collective at whatever school somebody chooses and say, hey, you're paying us. We'll continue to pay him through the deal that's already in force. Interesting.
So how messy? I mean, because I'm just kind of following this down the line here. I'm like, well, if I'm the family and I'm the kid, I'm saying, okay, well, we have an issue with that. Is there legal action they can take against that to try and, if they want to go to X school?
You try to get out of the contract, but the best move probably is try to get the collective at the new school to buy the contract. And then they can just tear it up and renegotiate with you. But that will also probably reduce the amount of money you get because they have to pay for that.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, and this could be Texas A&M, this could be anybody else, the collective at the school where the player is coming from can say, hey, we get a nice little cash infusion today. You buy the contract from us and we'll go use that on a corner or we'll go use that on a wide receiver.
Well, I was going to say a guy like Walter Nolan probably demands a pretty good chunk of change just by nature of the position that he is. How much is the defensive lineman of his caliber? What are you hearing someone, not him specifically, but someone in his position is kind of ranging around?
They're going to try. I would think they were going to try to get up close to $1 million. I don't know that that's necessarily the market for it, but I would say $500,000 and up for someone like that is very feasible. And, I've heard like with some of the good offensive linemen, $500,000 is a plausible number. A lockdown corner, $500,000 at the top of the market is plausible. So I would say someone who is that rare, whose talent is that rare, who there's not another one of these in the portal right now, I'd say they could get a pretty good amount of money. Now, that's probably not what they're like. If we're talking about Nolan, that's probably not what he's making at Texas A&M. So to buy his contract out probably isn't going to be as much. But then again, you have to probably subtract that number from what you're going to give him.
And you're talking about $1 million, like that's what a quarterback is going for, according to Matt Rule, saying, hey, we got quarterbacks around in the portal. I mean, is that accurate? $1 million?
Top of the market.
Okay.
$1 million, $1.5 million. And I think you're going to see some quarterbacks asking for $2 million.
Interesting.
And I think that's why you're seeing some of the more quality guys jumping in, like the Dillon Gabriel one. Dillon Gabriel should be able to go to somebody and say, look, I've been way more productive than any of these guys in college. Look at what I've done. Look at the numbers I've put up. Look at what I can do in this kind of offense. He's one who can help drive the price up. And he could maybe he was planning on doing it anyway, but maybe he looked at some of the numbers that are floating around and said, you know what? I can do some damage here because I'm better than these guys.
And Andy, to me, I would imagine a lot of those conversations would have to happen behind closed doors before they even say, hey, I'm jumping in the portal or I intend to enter. And so how much of hey, we dropped the ball on the collective or the powers that be, whoever's in charge of the NIL situation, to let someone like a Dillon Gabriel, like a Walter Nolan, get to the point where they're actually publicly saying, hey, I'm either in the portal, I'm going to the portal. Because that can't be good.
You say drop the ball.
It feels that way. If we're talking Walter Nolan,
if I'm Oklahoma's collective, and Dillon Gabriel now costs X dollars, and I have Jackson Arnold already under contract, and he's not going anywhere, he wants to be Oklahoma's starting quarterback, I just let Dillon Gabriel walk.
Interesting, but
is that dropping the ball?
I mean, for Walter Nolan, with it to be saying, "Hey, the collective's trying to talk to him,"
right?
It's like, so we didn't have that conversation on the front end, or you called our bluff, or how'd that happen?
It is up to them to decide: is he worth this relative to who we already have on the roster? And remember, A&M has some defensive line talent on the roster already that's pretty good. So if they were a program that didn't have anyone anywhere near this level, I think you'd pay him what you got to pay him to keep him. But since you do, you're going to be a little less flexible about that. And you're going to say, you know what, we're not going to be held over a barrel here. If you can find a better deal, go find it.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And I think some of it too, because you would assume there's a price tag for a Walter Nolan or a top end quarterback. Then you go back to, hey, well, what is the market? How many Walter Nolans are in the portal, or we think are going to be in the portal?
There's one right now.
Yeah,
and that's the thing. There might be another, and this it may smoke out some guys who've been on the fence about it.
Mm-hmm.
If they see that the demand for Walter Nolan is through the roof, they may say, you know what? Okay, I wasn't going to, but I'd be stupid not to.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at how everybody's going crazy over this, so it may smoke out one or two more. But that said, that position, plug and play defensive lineman, interior defensive lineman, there's so few of those human beings on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to be a small number, no matter what. Like there are lots of receivers who can run and catch.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of running backs who can hit a hole. There just are not very many defensive tackles who can dominate a game.
Yeah,
they don't exist.
Yeah, the premium, you would imagine, positions with defensive linemen and quarterbacks. And being in the state of Texas, seems like there's a fair amount of money for the schools that are in that state being able to make some moves.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the Longhorns a little bit right now. Let's go into our guy. We good with Bobby Burton to jump to him, guys, in the studio. Thumbs up, thumbs down. We're good to go. Hey, Bobby, how are we feeling on Portal Monday? Obviously, Texas is a major player when it comes to the transfer portal if they want to be landing guys like Adonai Mitchell and Quinn Ewers. First of all, how are you doing? Second of all, how is Texas feeling about their portal aspirations this Portal Monday?
Talked to somebody on Friday. Texas expects to be very aggressive in the portal with certain players. Texas is now at a point entering the college football playoff, Andy and JD, where they feel strongly that they can be selective and pick the right guys for their culture. Y'all may be talking about Walter Nolan. You may be talking about Evan Stewart. Those guys may not elite in talents, right? Elite in talents may not be right for the culture at the University of Texas right now.
Well, and that's
they're gonna look Andy and JD for specific guys that hit specific roles.
And that's what's so interesting. You heard Steve Sarkisian talk about their culture last week, Bobby, and he seems to have done a great job, kind of like Mike Norvell at Florida State, in identifying guys who come in and fit right away, especially this past year. It feels like this past year more than the year before, where they did take a couple guys who weren't fits and who didn't really contribute. This year, it felt like they hit on everybody.
Yes, you're so right. You just hit, Ajay Hall, Jaleel Billingsley were not culture fits. Keelan Robinson was. Adonai Mitchell was. Ryan Sanborn, the punter for Texas. He averaged 45 plus yards a punt after Texas averaged 42 a year ago. These guys that they brought in have all fit the culture. They're more blue collar for the most part, which seems to be what you want coming out of the portal. You don't necessarily want the prima donna that's going to upset the culture. You want the guys that are great players, but also ready to go to work.
Bobby, is there any positions of need that just jump out to you? Like, hey, Texas is definitely going after X, Y, and Z position this portal cycle?
No doubt. Texas is going to graduate heavily at wide receiver, JD. Not only Xavier Worthy heading off to the pros after a junior year, Adonai Mitchell having a 10-touchdown reception year. He's headed to the pros most likely. Jordan Whittington, who's kind of that all-purpose guy for Texas, he's gone. Top three guys gone. And really their only depth behind them are freshmen. So they're going to look for some adults in the room. I expect Texas to probably go after 2 receivers in the portal. Then you also look at other positions. Tight end, JT Sanders, who had a whale of a game on Saturday against Oklahoma State. He's gone. You look in the secondary at safety. They need to add some adults there because they've got 2 graduating safeties. Other than that, interior defensive line, but that's like the golden ticket. You're looking like Willy Wonka and the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It's really hard, right, to find the right guys. Brandon Fisk, what a pickup, for example, for Florida State this year. Texas would love to find someone like that, right? But were there any others in the portal? Texas got Trill Carter, who played, 100 snaps all year from Minnesota. There just aren't a lot. So I feel like that's going to be Like I said, I mean, I think that's the golden ticket.
Well, and we were talking about Walter Nolan before this, Bobby. It feels like somebody like that who could play anywhere on the defense, for anybody's defensive line, the market's going to be so high for him because there just aren't any of those guys out there.
Yeah, but look, Texas passed on Bear Alexander last year, who's a Texas native. They just let him go. I mean, they were approached. They just didn't, there's some things about that. And I do think Walter Nolan has some things about him like that, to be honest. Certain teams will be attracted to him. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to denigrate this young man or his family. It's just he will fit some places. He will not fit every place.
And Bobby, you mentioned fit being such a big thing. A lot of these guys want to play. And when you're at Texas, it's difficult to get on the field. And Texas being in the college football playoff, I don't expect that probably to get too much easier to see the field on the 40 acres. How does Texas approach in roster retention with so much success they're having on the field right now?
Steve Sarkisian's having meetings with all 85 members of the team in the next week to 2 weeks. That's his normal exit interview process. Every university that I know of goes through the same exact process. Texas has been delayed a week from normal because of the Big 12 championship. And then you have not only all of the media needs that Steve Sarkisian had to accommodate yesterday. I mean, you all know how much of Andy, you particularly know how much of a zoo that can be for a coach. But then you start thinking about other topics. And I'll give you one. I mean, he had to go on a recruiting visit last night to see Kobe Black. That's not a 30-minute trip to Waco, JD. You know that of all people. Yeah. That's a good hour and a half there, an hour and a half back.
It's always construction.
Yeah, 35
cruise control for a while there. Yeah.
And then you talk about the hour and a half, 2 hours in the home. That's an evening, right? So he can't be meeting with his players simultaneously. And so I think he's going to try to sit down with them this week and try to figure it out. I expect Texas to lose players to the portal that they don't want to, right? You talk about, I mean, Texas is getting deeper and deeper, but, I think that's the way of college football right now. I really do. I mean, Kyle McCord going in the portal. I mean, what the, Will Howard. I mean, these guys they're incumbent quarterbacks at major programs. This is crazy. Dillon Gabriel. I mean,
it really is. It's a weird world we're living in, Bobby. It really is. Like you said, having guys at big time schools that were starters last year deciding to seek greener pastures. Well, Bobby, we appreciate your time, man. I know you got a lot going on with the playoff and now Portal Monday. We appreciate you coming in and dropping some knowledge on us when it comes to what Texas may be doing this portal cycle.
Yep, absolutely. You guys have fun.
Yes, sir. Will do. It is a bit fun today, huh?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I just thought of something when we were talking about the incumbent quarterbacks. How much of this is still the COVID year messing with everybody's clock? Like, I think if Will Howard was out of eligibility and Avery Johnson was there, like that's the succession plan. Mm-hmm. That's how that was supposed to work. Mm-hmm. And I think you're seeing a few situations like that, the Dillon Gabriel, Jackson Arnold situation, where without the COVID year, there would be no choice to make. Mm-hmm. Like, they have these young guys, they brought them in because all the coaches' clocks work the same way, their internal clocks. They're not thinking about that extra year of eligibility. And so I think that's part of this that will be going away here in the next year or so, because all of the guys who were in school in 2020 are cycling out. So there's not that extra year of eligibility. But right now you still have this weird deal where coaches recruited as if everything was normal, mm-hmm. but you have quarterbacks who have this extra year of eligibility.
And then you tack on top of that all the conference realignment stuff.
Correct.
And Texas head to the SEC. I meant to ask Bobby about this, but Andy, how do you see Texas's needs evolving going to a very heavily line of scrimmage conference? It's already great in line of scrimmage right now. You'd imagine as they move next year into the SEC that importance just only grows on that part, on that position group.
I think they've done a good job evolving that. I think you look at their development of Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. You look at the way they developed Christian Jones, getting Kelvin Banks. Notice I've not mentioned a transfer here.
Yeah,
So you want to win on the line of scrimmage, you still have to be really good recruiting out of high school.
Without question.
And that's what Texas has done well. But it's not just getting them; it's developing them, making sure they don't transfer, making sure they like being there, making sure your collective takes care of them. And I think Texas has done a good job of that.
The roster retention seems to be as important as being able to scout the portal right now. It
Right.
really does.
Exactly, because before last season, or in the last offseason, somebody could have gone and tried to convince Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat to go somewhere else. They could have.
Yeah.
Nothing would have stopped them.
Yeah.
And what stopped them is they feel like they're getting developed in Texas, and Texas's collective did its job.
Which is funny because you talk about development. That was a thing that people used to talk about with Texas as a thing to keep them from going to Texas.
Absolutely.
It was like a negative
You look at-
recruiting
you
tool.
look
It was,
at-
hey, you don't go there.
Yeah.
You won't get heard from again.
Their draft history in recent years is abysmal.
Yeah.
It's terrible, but it's not going to be now.
It's going to be phenomenal
Yeah.
going forward.
Sweat and Murphy are going to be high draft picks this year. JT Sanders is going to be a high draft pick. Xavier Worthy will be a high draft pick when he comes out.
Quinn Ewers a chance to elevate his stock.
Yeah, Kelvin Banks in the draft of 2025. He's not eligible for this one. But Christian Jones is a great example. He will get drafted somewhere.
Mhm.
Whereas that type of offensive lineman at Texas from 2010 to 2020 wasn't ever getting drafted.
Yeah, it really is interesting to see how these schools not just develop, but also, like we talked about earlier, scouting the portal is so paramount right now because you may need a quarterback if your quarterback hits the portal at drop of a hat, or you may need an offensive lineman, like you mentioned, if you have a guy that ends up not being available for the portal or for whatever reason. When it comes to scouting the portal, Andy, what are you hearing when it comes to the way these staffs are approaching this right now? Because you can't recruit high school and portal to the same degree,
Right.
or can you?
You can,
Okay.
and some are. And so basically what they did, and the good thing for this part of it is this system already existed at another level of football, and so they just copied it. Basically, the way NFL staffs are set up, their scouting staffs, is they have the staff that scouts college players, and they have an entirely separate division that scouts the other NFL teams to figure out who do we want to sign in free agency, who can we pick up if they get cut, this week, and we might need them at a certain position. So all of those types of people, and a lot of the scouting world in college comes from the scouting world in the NFL. They understand how that works. So basically, you have a pro personnel department, which is what the NFL teams call the departments that scout the other NFL teams. So that department went from non-existent in college to now being just as important as the group that recruits the guys out of high school.
It really is so fascinating because it becomes more and more, it feels like a professional model, and the transfer portal is another addition of that, NIL, another addition of that. But whenever you have a guy transfer, more often than not, there is a reason as to why they are transferring. Is it more difficult in some sense to scout the personal part of a player? Because it's like, hey, he wasn't a fit here.
Well, and especially in this particular piece of it, because like on the NFL side, they have all the research they did pre-draft. They have they have a pretty good idea of what's going on. In this case, if you didn't recruit that guy out of high school, you may only have 24 hours to figure out what makes him tick. Why is he leaving? Is there a red flag that we missed? It's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot. So you're calling, like I've talked to the personnel guys, and they'll tell me that they've got a nice little network amongst each other. They're calling. You'll call assistant coaches that you've worked with. Hey, when you were at this school, did you recruit this kid? Did you know anybody who recruited this kid? And your phone tree is going crazy trying to figure out, can I find someone in the next hour who knows this kid, who recruited him in high school, who can tell me what I need to know?
Checking references. As in any other professional warrior, checking the references and seeing, hey, why is he or is he not a fit for us? Because culture is so huge in college football.
Exactly. And the thing, and like Bobby was saying with Steve Sarkisian, you go back to Ajayi Hall and Joel Billingsley. Okay, both those guys at Alabama, you looked at them and you're like, oh my God, these guys are amazing. Look at they're incredible athletes. Maybe they're just not being able to get on the field because there are equally incredible athletes or more incredible athletes in front of them in Alabama, but surely they'll succeed here. Well, the reasons they didn't succeed at Alabama were the same reasons they didn't succeed at Texas. Steve Sarkisian knew that. I think that was a case of you're just trying to get those kind of athletes in. But I think he re-examined that situation this offseason and said, you know what? That probably was more deductive than additive. So let's do something that's going to be additive.
Absolutely. And Clemson is an interesting case study in that, because we talked about Florida State in that game and how heavy they went in the portal. But Clemson, from my understanding, they want to really protect their culture, their way of doing things. But to me, Andy, I'm thinking, okay, if your culture is so strong, what is adding one talented Keon Coleman level player?
Correct. And that, I think, is the push-pull with Dabo that he's got to come to grips with himself. He's absolutely right in that their culture is what made them so successful. Mm-hmm. Also some elite quarterbacks, but that's neither here nor there.
On top.
But they had so much continuity. Players didn't want to leave. Players enjoyed being there. Players worked hard there. The competition amongst each other was great. So you don't want to mess with that if you can get away with it. But the problem is you can't get away with it and win now. You have to be able to upgrade. And I think you can look in your own conference at Florida State as a great example of a school that has figured out how to identify players in the portal that fit your culture, or that even if they're not necessarily a perfect culture fit, the rest of your culture is so strong that they have no choice but to adapt and assimilate.
Just raises the level of everybody's play, of everybody's
which
way.
I would say Clemson would have that.
You would think so.
If you were to bring in 7 strategically chosen portal players, mm-hmm. and you would only bring them in if you think they can start or be rotation guys right away. Mm-hmm. And probably half those guys are perfect fits anyway, mm-hmm. personality-wise, because you recruited them out of high school, If the other 3 aren't, they're probably going to figure out how to get along. Mm-hmm. Or you can just dump them if they don't. Mm-hmm. Like, you kick them off, like they're misbehaving, kick them off the team. Like, you can do this and not tear down everything you've already built if you're Dabo Swinney.
And it feels like at some point in time, you might have to do that, because Florida State, like we mentioned throughout the course of the show, is absolutely crushing it in the portal right now. And let's take a look at some of the guys that they landed just this last cycle that made their team exponentially better. Keon Coleman, Jaheim Bell, Fentrell Cypress. Mm-hmm. I mean, Jaheim Bell's listed as wide receiver, tight end. I mean, Swiss Army knife. You can put him in whatever position you want. Braden Fisk had not 1, not 2, but 3 sacks in the ACC title game.
Why
are they so good in the portal? Why are they so good in the portal, Andy? What is it that makes them just electric?
Because they understand how people fit. Like Keon Coleman is one. He was great no matter where he was going to be. Mm-hmm. Like, he was the best receiver in a bad offense at Michigan State. Mm-hmm. But his physical tools were undeniable. Like, you watch him run a route at practice, you're like, this guy is elite. He's an NFL wide receiver. There's no question. Like, I am not a scout. I went to a Florida State practice earlier this season, saw Keon Coleman run 2 reps, and I'm like, okay, that's the best player on the team. You don't have to be a scout to know Keon Coleman good. The Braden Fisk thing is the best portal work they did this year, because we've talked about how hard it is to find those guys. They have found a great defensive lineman in the portal 3 years in a row. Jermaine Johnson, ACC Defensive Player of the Year. Jared Verse, potential first-round draft pick, who played 2 years for them and has been dominant. Mm-hmm. Braden Fisk, who is going to be an effective NFL defensive tackle someday and was a great addition to that team. So they've done they're really good at evaluating the Group of 5, the FCS. I mean, here's how they found Jared Verse. Mm-hmm. So they were playing Syracuse, and Albany had played Syracuse. And so everybody who played Syracuse in 2021 was like, who the hell is that guy? Watching the Danes play, and there's Jared Verse. And so Florida State, very quickly, like, as soon as he hit the portal, all the ACC teams that had played Syracuse were all over him. Yeah. Because they knew exactly who he was. They're like, oh my God, the guy from Albany hit the portal.
We need him on our roster now. I mean, and I think it does just speak volumes to the fact that it's not just one position group. Yes, they're crushing on the defensive line. Jordan Travis was a transfer quarterback from Louisville.
Well,
Keon Coleman, Michigan State.
Willie Taggart gets credit for taking him.
There we go. Yeah,
he was still the coach. But it's funny because we sort of think of Jordan Travis as a guy who was always there with Mike Norvell, and he was, because he transferred when Willie Taggart was the coach. Yeah. But he was a transfer. Yeah. Like, he was a player from Florida who wanted to play at Florida State. He went to Louisville. It didn't work out there. That was, I believe, the tail end of the Bobby Petrino era. Mm-hmm. And so he winds up coming to Florida State and blossoming.
I mean, it really is. I mean, I keep going back to this game, but Florida State being able to pass Clemson in the ACC because of what they did in the portal.
I mean, you go to that game, if Keon Coleman,
it's unbelievable.
If Keon Coleman's on Clemson, Clemson wins the game.
Without question.
And Keon
they might win by a sizable margin.
Right. Now, Clemson didn't go after Keon Coleman, but let's imagine when he left Michigan State, what if they had? Like, you would have listened?
Yeah, 100% sure. You would have. 100%.
I don't know if you still might have gone to Florida State, but you'd have listened.
Yeah, without question. I mean, it really, you cannot say enough good things about the way that Mike Norvell has put that roster together via the portal and elevated Florida State. And I mean, did everything they could to be a college football playoff team, falling just short. Another conversation for another time when it comes to the committee.
Exactly.
We got a little bit of buzz going on in the Dillon Gabriel situation. Josh Newberg got the latest for us. Josh, what's going on there?
Yeah, Dillon Gabriel is officially in the portal. Rumors were swirling this morning that he was going to do so. He is officially in, and Pete Nakos of On3 says, look out for Mississippi State, Oregon, and USC for Dillon Gabriel.
Wow.
So
what do you think of those options, Andy?
Well, Mississippi State would be just going with Jeff Lebby. So Jeff Lebby was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma, also his offensive coordinator at UCF, and now Jeff Lebby's the head coach at Mississippi State. It would supercharge Jeff Lebby's first season at Mississippi State for sure. And, you know, listen, we're not going to cast any aspersions, but this makes it sound like this might have been a little bit set up.
Yeah, it feels that way.
So
where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah. But, you know, again, other options. Josh, what were the other options that?
Yeah, USC.
USC and Oregon is what Pete Nakos is reporting teams of interest.
I would love to see him in Oregon's offense.
And just one more note. Now that Dillon Gabriel is in the portal officially, he will be On3's #1 player.
Ooh.
Boom.
Look at that.
Mic drop from Josh Newberg, bringing the juice, man. How about that? Okay, so that means they're putting him ahead of Cam Ward, ahead of Will Howard. And I think you said this, Andy.
Yep.
I mean, he is more productive than all those guys.
It's him or Riley Leonard. That for me, that it would be one of those two.
I mean, interesting here. We keep hearing about USC in the portal quarterback market. They're a team that keeps on bubbling up. What does that say about Lincoln Riley saying, okay, yes, we got some guys on our depth chart. We want to go after a proven commodity. Sense of urgency in LA from Lincoln Riley?
It's saying he doesn't think they're the guy. It's saying he doesn't think QB1 for 2024 is on their roster right now. And look, if he thought that, he wouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be meeting with Will Howard. Like none of that would be happening. So clearly he believes they don't have it, which, I mean, we're not going to speculate too much, but I think that means we'll see some more names jump in.
Yeah.
But Dillon Gabriel in Lincoln Riley's offense would be good. As we talked about, the Browns offense, they are different offenses, but you could probably have a quarterback shuttle between the two, especially a guy who's played in as many games as Dillon Gabriel. He's the most experienced of these guys, the most experienced and productive of all these guys.
Doesn't he feel like, from a skill set perspective, a left-handed Bo Nix, like pretty mobile?
Yeah, that's why I said I'd love to see him in the Oregon offense.
Guard. I think he'd be a great fit there, like you mentioned. And that would, I mean, kind of keep the whole thing going for Oregon as they move into the Big Ten.
Yep.
Could be a great fit. All of those fits make sense. I'm excited to see where he ends up being the #1 player for us here at On3. That's big. That's big time for Dillon Gabriel. And like I said, makes a whole lot of sense.
I just thought of another one for Tyler.
I love
Van
it.
Dyke. You ready?
I'm all ears.
You want somebody else who's been in the Gus Malzahn tree?
Ooh.
Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State.
Okay.
Just saying.
That could be a nice little fit. Could be a nice fit. And Jaden Rashada also at Arizona State. That would be a good quarterback derby to watch. I mean, two guys that had ties to Miami at different points in time. I mean, we'll see.
We will.
It really, it's so funny because you don't think about college football being one of those sports where you're scrolling through your Twitter feed or Instagram feed and seeing a player with a jersey swap. And you're like, oh, that's what Tyler Van Dyke would look like in an Arizona State uniform. That's what Will Howard looks like in a USC uniform.
Listen, hey, Photoshoppers, get going.
Yeah.
Now's your chance.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, a ton of buzz around the quarterback market, ton of buzz around a lot of the big names. But it seems to me like every year there is somebody who's a little bit more off the radar that ends up making a splash, maybe this year's version of Braden Fisk. Let's take a look at some of the sneaky best available, if you will, here, Andy. Thor Griffith, someone you had on the show, bench press extraordinaire over at Harvard. Wide receiver Chris Tyree. I mean, he played running back for Notre Dame. He could help you in any fashion, returns punts. I mean, he's someone that, kind of similar to what we talked about, you don't need a fit for Chris Tyree. You'd like one, I'm sure, if you're the Tyree family and Chris Tyree, but like everyone can use a Chris Tyree as well as some other names on there.
Yeah, I mean, Thor Griffith, he's a dude that is going to plug up the middle. I would think in an odd front as a nose would be pretty good. He's not he's not massive like SEC nose size. So, but you could put him in the Big Ten and probably play him anywhere along the defensive line, which I think would like, and maybe Michigan's a kind of fit for him.
Interesting.
Now they're going to have some good players. Kenneth Grant's got another year before he goes and becomes a first-round draft pick. But they've done a great job developing along their defensive line. They've also, like, Michigan's been great at spot portal recruiting, especially on the offensive line. Now they maybe do it on the defensive line too, but we saw them do it on the offensive line last year with Ladarius Perkins coming from Arizona State, and then with the center Oluwatimi coming from Virginia.
Nice pronunciation on that.
There you go.
That was nice.
Yeah,
you just nailed that.
I think so.
Golly,
I hope so, Olu.
If you didn't, I have no gauge for that. But I think what you're saying is on the money. Like, they have been one of those teams in the portal that have been successful on the lines of scrimmage. When it comes to some other guys that maybe are sneaky best available, anybody to you, Andy, that jumps off? Keon Coleman feels like maybe he was last year. I mean, Eric McAllister from Boise State, Kennard Snyder at Louisiana Monroe. Anybody else that jumps out that you think maybe deserves some recognition this portal cycle?
Has Evan Stewart officially entered the portal? I don't think he has.
Not to my knowledge.
That's one that
not to my knowledge.
There was a fake floating around the other day, and you thought, "Ooh, that would be interesting." But I want to see this receiver class once it all settles, because that was the thing with Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman was a late portal addition. Remember, he went through spring practice before he made that decision. He and Peyton Thorne went at the same time, although it was not a combined effort to do it. They, as you saw, they went to different schools. But that's the other piece of this is there's more to this. It's not just today. It's not just this month. Now, the one thing about this month that is interesting, if you want to go from one SEC school to another, you got to get in now.
Interesting. Is that a rule across different Power 5 conferences?
Just the SEC.
Just the SEC.
And they considered getting rid of it to have the same rules as everybody else, but then they realized if they did it this way, it would actually calm a lot of stuff down, because a lot of the guys who are at SEC schools only want to go to another SEC school. They don't really want to go to another conference. So it did tend to calm things down in the spring for the SEC schools. So they liked it better that way. So they kept it.
And why is that? Just because the SEC has produced the most NFL talent?
That's exactly what it is.
Stay in the SEC.
It's the draft numbers.
Conference. Interesting. Okay.
100% the draft numbers.
Interesting. Well, I mean, a lot of these guys obviously will have their fair share of options. Chris Tyree really is one that I'm watching there pretty closely, because is he a guy that you think could translate and be a running back somewhere else and go play in the backfield? I mean, is he someone that you think wants to play receiver? He's from the DMV.
Yeah.
I'm watching Maryland.
I was going to say, this feels like a Mike Loxley special right here.
Feels like it a little bit, right? Feels like he could be someone that ends up doing some good things for them there. Let's keep this thing moving now. Let's talk a little bit about the Gators here. I think we'll have Nick De La Torre here in just a little bit. But Andy, you went to Florida, so you're probably the best person to talk to when it comes to the Gators. But I mean, how do you feel about Florida and what they might need to do in the portal? We'll get Nick's opinion as well. Overall thoughts on
Well, unfortunately, the two positions they have where they need the most are the two that we've said all day you can't build through the portal. So they need a better offensive line and a better defensive line.
Yeah.
And they lost Chris McClellan to the portal last night on the D-line. It'll be interesting. They did fire their D-line coach, Sean Spencer, and you may see some movement there because Sean Spencer is going to Texas A&M. So you may see some folks going to follow the guy they like. But we'll see how that goes. The one they're waiting to find out what's going to happen with Trevor Etienne. You know, very talented running back. Nothing's happened as of yet, but that's one that is on the radar. Graham Mertz is coming back, so quarterback's taken care of. Yeah. At receiver, they have Eugene Wilson, who's a good young player, but I think they'd probably like to add to that group through the portal.
And Max Brown leaving, it sounds like, through the portal.
Right.
You have to go in and maybe add some depth. Maybe not a guy that's going to be quarterback one, but someone that you think could provide a little bit of.
You got DJ Lagway coming in. I think you probably go into the next season thinking DJ Lagway is the backup, with the eye on him becoming the starter in 2025. They probably will have to get another body at that position in the portal. You also may be able to sign another one too.
Yeah, and it feels like, I know we'll talk about the Gators here, but just SEC overall, it seems like there's some schools, specifically a Georgia or a Alabama, that are able to, like you talked about, just kind of develop in their own backyard. They're able to just say, well, we'll use the portal as we want to. We'll go grab a Jameer Gibbs here. We'll grab a Jermaine Burton here.
Yep.
Is that something where you think schools don't necessarily want to lean on the portal as heavily? They'd rather just keep it all in house.
Oh, they would all rather do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's much easier to do it that way. Or well, it's not that it's easier. It's very hard to develop players well and to recruit at that level out of high school. But it's the most effective way if you'd like to win a national championship.
Yeah.
Like, show me the team that went mostly portal that won a national title. You can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't.
We haven't seen it yet.
They don't. So until that happens, the best way is still going to be get those players out of high school and develop them. And especially, again, along the line of scrimmage, so far, that's the only way to do it.
And you hear so much about the SEC and how much supposed NIL juice they have. So that NIL collectives, all those resources, is that going into roster retention, or where does that go? Because
well, that's a good question, because we know one SEC school that just paid a $77 million buyout.
Yes, we do. We do.
But that's Texas A&M. They do tend to have lots of money.
Mm-hmm.
So their donors can like get you one that can do both.
Yes.
Like they can donate to the athletic department to pay that buyout, but also can donate to the collective. I do think even in the SEC, there are issues where certain schools, they've got maybe a capital campaign going on where the athletic department's saying, hey, give us your money. And the collective's like, hey, no, give us your money. And this is where problems start.
Yes.
And because you have to decide, like, if you're the AD, do you tell people who've already donated to the capital camp, we're going to have to slow this thing down so that you can give some money to the collective, because we need you to do that to win. And it's tricky. I don't think this is going to exist for very long, this system. Because think about how stupid this is, where you have the millionaire coach begging people to give money to pay the players. Well, ideally, you just give less to the coach and give that to the players.
Right. And is that something where, because I had someone text me yesterday, and it was a great question I know the answer to. If you're the head coach or the football team as a whole, is there like an illegal way to funnel money back towards the roster? Because it feels like it's like, hey, it's my money. I want to use it in the correct way.
Well, if you're the program, you can't do it.
Right.
If it's in your bank account already, you can't do that. But you can absolutely go to your biggest donor and say, the gift you were about to give us to put your name on this thing, give it to the collective.
Yes.
But there's
put
nothing
your name on this roster.
Nothing against that. Exactly.
Put your name on this roster.
But that also, like, there are donors who don't necessarily want to do that. They're worried about the tax implications of it. They're worried about some of them just don't want to pay players. Like, it's not a cut and dried easy thing. And that's why the schools that have collectives that are running efficiently and that have figured out how to get people to donate to them, that's why they are having such a better time of this. Like, Texas is a great example of that.
Yeah.
They've got a good collective. Everything's running smoothly. But again, that's Texas. They got lots of rich people.
Yeah.
Kansas State and Missouri don't have tons of rich people, but they've done a great job setting up their collectives, a great job establishing with their donors, this is important. Let's do it this way.
And it's so interesting because I think there's some, especially at the onset of this, there was a connotation of, hey, portal, NIL, that's selfish. That's not keeping the team first. That's something we don't want to get into the college football world. And then slowly but surely, you're seeing the teams that are using it the right way, like you said, are the ones that are starting to separate themselves on the recruiting trail and on the field because of the nature of the roster they have.
It's amazing how teams with better players tend to do better than teams with worse players. Like, it's crazy how that works.
It's unbelievable. We got a little bit of news here right now as Portal Monday keeps on rolling. Josh, what's the latest, brother?
Yep, another QB hitting the portal. This time it's Utah quarterback Bryson Barnes.
Okay. Well,
that's big.
Is it?
I think it's always big for Utah in some sense. You just lost a starting quarterback from last season. You got Cam Rising, obviously, but
you got Cam Rising.
Is there any guarantee he's going to be 100% healthy?
He's going to have had a whole year off.
A whole year off, but I think if you're Cam Rising, it's
this
is the
first walk-on pig farmer to
leads
hit
FBS and pigs, I believe.
Yes. Yep. So, but no, now you got an experienced guy who's played in big games. But look, if you this is where I caution people in the portal, and it's just not thinking against Bryson Barnes, but don't assume just because somebody started at a program that's pretty good for a little bit that because they come to you, you're all of a sudden going to get way better.
Right.
Bryson Barnes is transferring because Cam Rising is back. That's why Bryson Barnes is transferring.
Yeah.
If they thought Bryson Barnes was better than Cam Rising would have transferred.
And they would have told him and said, hey, maybe Bryson Barnes stick around a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Very curious. Well, as we promised, we got from Gators Online, Nick De La Torre on this Portal Monday. Nick, craziness today, man. How are we feeling? What's the latest with the Gators as it pertains to the transfer portal?
Well, I think Andy transferred. I went to my normal coffee place, didn't see him working out there this morning. But I think it's going to be really busy for Florida. I've tried to caution Florida fans and let them know, like, hey, Florida needs to get down to like 66 scholarships just to be able to sign their recruiting class. So there's going to be 15 to 20 guys that you're going to see hit the portal. And obviously some of them will be guys that have been around for a while, maybe have been around for more years and have snaps played. But then you've got names like Chris McClellan, who came out last night, who's a guy Florida would have liked to have kept. Trevor Etienne's a name that has been rumored to be looking at the portal. That one would sting. And Shamar James, every single time the portal opens, it seems like his name gets attached to it. And in the age of transfer portal and NIL, don't blame him. don't blame him.
So where is Florida at from a collective standpoint, Nick? Where do they rank in terms of the rest of the SEC and then the rest of the state when you're dealing with Miami and Florida State?
Yeah, it's interesting. It looks like Florida State has had maybe a late start, but has surged in terms of their collective. Florida had one of the first collectives to start, and then it kind of fell off a little bit. And then you have a change, it gets sold to somebody else. So now Florida Victoria certainly has way more backing by the coaches and by the university. But I think roughly the same membership. And Florida has to continually go to the same boosters over and over again to ask for money. It's tough. It's hard to ask for money and go 5-7 and then continue asking for money. But I think the conversation you have to have is, listen, I understand that the product on the field might not be what you want to donate to, but if you aren't donating, the product on the field will remain the same.
And Nick, what's the evaluation process if you're Florida? Because it seems like as you go further and further on into the Billy Napier era, the intensity around that program seems to just kind of rise. What's the eval process right now for the Gators?
Yeah, listen, they've got if you're talking about players, they have their evaluation process. It takes a while. They really like grinding tape. I remember fans got mad. They asked players who I think had been pretty established to go through and tape some workouts for them because they wanted to see what they looked like, currently. But Florida has a bunch of needs. They need depth, starters, talent, an influx of talent on both defense and offensive line. You need playmakers on the edges, on the defensive line, and at receiver. Florida has a lot of needs, and I think to look at the roster, it's not fair to compare them to Georgia and Alabama, but it is fair because next year we don't even have divisions, so you're competing against Alabama straight up. Florida's roster has a lot of work to do. And I think they need to be aggressive in the portal, which means you're also going to have to see several players leave that maybe you wouldn't have expected.
How much does Graham Mertz coming back change the dynamics of this?
Well, it's going to be interesting. I would be more surprised if Jack Miller is on the roster come spring or fall, which leaves you only with 2 scholarship quarterbacks. Now, getting Graham Mertz back and signing a guy like DJ Lagway, not really sure that you're going to get like a Dillon Gabriel or one of those top end quarterbacks to come and compete with Graham. So it's huge for Florida, I think, in terms of trying to get some skill position guys from the portal. But you're in a position where you're 2 sprained ankles away from starting a walk-on at quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see how Florida handles the transfer portal when it comes to quarterbacks. And then also, how do they handle high school recruiting? Because I think you're going to need 2 other guys just to fill out that room.
And you mentioned just some positions of need earlier, Nick. Overall with this roster, is this a spot where you think they need to lean pretty heavily on the portal? Is it something where you can kind of just tinker with it a little bit and maybe focus more on what you already have in-house? I mean, what's the overall landscape of the roster right now as it pertains to portal needs?
Florida this coaching staff has had the mentality of we need to build our roster and our organization through high school recruiting and kind of like spot pick where we need to in the transfer portal. There's just so many needs. When I watched the SEC championship game, when I watched Florida even play at Kentucky, there's just so many glaring needs. And I think the seat will be very hot in 2024. I don't know that this coaching staff survives another 5 and 7. So while you've had that mentality of we need to just supplement through the transfer portal, you need to win next year in a big way. So I think there needs to be a huge emphasis and some urgency in the transfer portal period for Florida. Offense, defense, there's really not many positions you can point to and say they'd be okay not upgrading there.
So I would assume offensive line, like if you're talking about how do you portion your money out and how do you spend, I would think if you feel like you could get an SEC ready center or an SEC ready
cut the check,
like that's the one you write the check for, right?
Yeah. Defensive tackle, defensive end, receiver, offensive tackle. The issue I think is, when you're transfer portal shopping, you're not shopping at Neiman Marcus for offensive tackles, like elite offensive tackles. Maybe. Elite offensive tackles go to elite schools. They play for 3 years and then they get drafted in the first round or second round. So, you might be at Dollar General shopping for offensive tackles, and that's just the way it is. I think there have been some good guards, and Florida got some production out of Micah Mazuka as a guard. But just to make that point, like there weren't many people that were upset about Michael Tarquin leaving last year. And then he was one of the best offensive tackles in the transfer portal, goes to USC and becomes a starter. So I see a lot of Florida fans saying, all right, we need to go out and get 6 to 8 starters on the offense and defensive lines. And I'm like, what world are we shopping? Yeah, there's lots of guys in the transfer portal.
There may not be 6 to 8 SEC quality offensive and defensive line starters in the portal the entire offseason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just comes down to finding a bargain. If you go thrift shopping, you can find exactly what you need. You go find the right FCS guy. You go find, I don't know, your Jared Verse maybe. If there is any of those in the portal, I'm sure Florida would be happy to acquire them. Nick, appreciate all your time, man. I know you got a lot going on right now on Portal Monday and everything going on with the Florida Gators postseason now that we're in, but appreciate you. And I'm sure we'll check back in here in the near future.
Thanks, guys.
Nick De La Torre from Gators Online. Great stuff. As always, get a membership there if you haven't already for this portal cycle. Just overall thoughts on the state of Florida right now.
Well, Florida State is the king in the state of Florida right now. As bad as their day was yesterday, which is obviously completely out of their control, they're the king. They seem to be the one that has the best long-term plan. And you see what Mike Norvell is doing. The success they've had through the portal has actually helped them with their high school recruiting too. So it's sort of feeding itself. I'll be curious to see what happens to Alex Atkins, their offensive coordinator. He's a future head coach. It's just a matter of when. Yeah. So maybe this cycle he doesn't get plucked and they get to keep him for another year to develop the offensive line a little more. That would be big for them. With Miami, they upgraded on the offensive line through high school and through the portal. Can they continue to do that? And really, are they ever going to get over the hump? Because a lot of that is, I don't think they have a talent problem anymore. I don't necessarily think they had a talent problem when Manny Diaz was coaching them. I think they're, for whatever reason, they just can't seem to put it all together. Yeah. And I think what happened against Georgia Tech, the not taking a knee, I think that was a pretty crippling thing this year. So I know there's a lot of people who have long-term questions about Mario Cristobal's viability there. Is he going to actually get them over the hump? He needs to probably be a little less stubborn in terms of his game day coaching. But in terms of roster construction, he does seem to understand that pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, like you said, the optics of things with not taking a knee and kind of just have it maybe looking worse than it even was at Miami. I kind of, that's the way I feel a little bit about Florida right now. They had some really quality moments last year, one of which, a big win over Tennessee. They were competitive at different moments. They had the loss that I guess was optically very bad against Arkansas at the end of it. But all this to say, the SEC is
bad. It's bad at Florida.
You think it's bad?
Oh yeah.
You think real deal bad?
It's bad. You got a coach who's going to enter the season on the hot seat. Yeah. You've got, like Nick said, Their biggest needs are on the offensive and defensive line, which you cannot solve through the transfer portal.
Yeah, well, we'll see. It's not getting any easier in the SEC. And to break it down for another team that's in the SEC right now, obviously, the Tennessee Vols from VolQuest, Brent Hubbs. Brent, appreciate you making time on this Portal Monday, man. Let's just get right to it. What do the Vols need to do in the portal to improve upon this season?
Well, I think Tennessee's fascinating. I think they're one of the more fascinating teams in this portal cycle because they have 20 players on their roster who can return for a COVID year. So they could be one of the oldest teams in the league and in college football, or they could get really young really fast, depending on how many of those guys return. They have to have a tight end in the portal, and that's why you've seen Tennessee just in the last few hours, Tennessee get active in offering the Jolly kid who plays at UConn that actually put on a show in Knoxville, nearly had 100 yards receiving against Tennessee. They just offered him here in the last couple of hours. So I think that's where it starts for Tennessee is at the tight end position, Justin Jolly being one of those guys. They can take up to 2 tight ends in this portal cycle. And then you look on the offensive line, do you need one? It depends on how many of those COVID guys come back. Same thing for the defensive line for Tennessee. So I think they're going to be active in the portal. But, guys, it's going to really depend a lot on what these COVID seniors do. And Tennessee's got to have some answers from those guys sooner rather than later because you can't wait in this cycle.
How do you handle that, Hubbard, if you're Josh Heupel? Because these are guys, if they're COVID guys, they're probably graduated. They probably can transfer somewhere else and play right away, even if they transferred once before. Do you have to be kind of harsh at a certain point and say, hey, we need a spot?
Well, and I think overall, Andy, this is the hardest thing for college coaches because college coaches don't get told no, right? Particularly at the Power 5 level. You need more money? Fine. You need more resources? You need another analyst? When's the last time guys are getting told no? And then you look at the NFL, there's a reason most NFL head coaches don't succeed as GMs because they have a hard time taking some of the emotions out of it and saying, I want everything. So if you're Josh Heupel, you can't, if you're going to flip your roster and you're going to continue to develop young guys, you probably don't need all those guys to come back. It's probably not in your best interest for all those guys to come back. So how do you handle that is a great question. Do you tell guys, hey, I think it's in your best interest, you probably head on elsewhere? I think that's what happened with Brandon Turnage, who's a guy who went into the transfer portal. I think he felt like his opportunities weren't at Tennessee, and I don't think Tennessee was really overly bothered by that. Same for Warren Burrell. Tennessee's got some young bodies in that secondary that they need to get on the field because what are we seeing today, guys? How many sophomores are going into the portal because they've been somewhere 2 years and they don't feel like they're playing enough? That's the challenge for head coaches around the country. The management of the veterans, hey, I want them all back versus do I take a chance on losing young players because they're going to sit behind a veteran for another year?
Well, that was kind of leading to the next thing I wanted to ask you, Brent, because right now a word you're hearing a lot or a phrase you're hearing a lot is roster retention this, retention that, and how it pertains to the portal. Is Tennessee going to have to be fairly active on that front this portal cycle, or do you feel like they're in good shape there?
No, I think you have to be active. I don't think anybody's in good shape with what we're seeing out there. look at what's happened today. Look at all the quarterbacks that are going in the portal, and I think you have to have a plan going into this week, going into last week. I think November is very different than it used to be. You got to find out who, if I lose a veteran guy, do I feel like my young guy can step in and go right away and we don't miss a beat there? Or do I really have to fight to keep the veteran guy? Or I have to fight to keep the guy because it's going to cost more money to replace him than I want to spend or I can spend, or I don't feel like I can get better than what I have right now. These are all the things that coaches are dealing with, which is a real shock and a real challenge for them because it's not just about going out and getting 25 guys every year anymore. And it's never going to be that way. And those who adapt to this the best are going to long-term make it. And I think there's a balance between it all, right, Andy? You got to have young players you develop. You can't be the John Gruden free agent team in college football where you just take a bunch of veterans every year out of the portal. But you have to hit in the portal. Florida State was sitting where they were prior to Jordan Travis's injury because of what they hit in the portal, the 2 receivers, Jared Verse. So you've got to hit it, but you got to be careful that you don't overdo it. And you got to be careful that you don't underdo it because you've got to assemble a roster that gives you the best chance to win the following year but also does it deplete you for 2 years from now because those veterans end up running off a bunch of young players?
Hubbard, what are the chances that Walter Nolan returns to East Tennessee?
Oh, that's a great one. That's on the general's quarters today. There's a lot of topic and a lot of discussion about that one. Again, anything is possible, but I mean, that guy's a commodity, right? I mean, his phone's blowing up today. His people's phones have been blowing up for the last 48 hours when rumblings got out that this was going to happen. So I think anything is possible with him. I think I don't think he's going to go back to A&M, but it is a little bit interesting, Andy, in that Sean Spencer has been hired as the defensive line coach in College Station. Walter Nolan visited Florida a couple times with Sean Spencer down there. So he knows Sean Spencer. Again, I think Walter's leaving College Station. I think that they're uprooting as an entire family and probably getting out of there. But at the same time, too, you just, in this world, you never know. He's going to have a bunch of opportunities. And if you're Tennessee, you gotta kick the tires there a little bit, right? Now, here's the thing. What happens if Omar Norman-Lott comes back? And what happens if Omari Thomas comes back? And you bring back 4 veteran defensive linemen? Does Walter Nolan look at that and go, wait a minute, I'm going to be one of 7 in the defensive interior? Is that where I want to go? We saw a kid leave Georgia and go to USC because he didn't want to be one of 5, right? I mean, and he wanted more money. So there's a lot of variables in play there with Walter Nolan. That one's going to be pretty fascinating to watch because his recruitment coming out of high school was one for the ages to follow for sure.
And what is Josh Heupel's philosophy on the portal? Because I would imagine there's some coaches that kind of treat it like the NFL draft and say we're taking the best available. And if a 5-star kid jumps in there, we're at least going to give him a call and see if he can help us. Or is it a thing where, hey, we need these positions. We have other guys we recruited we like, we want to trust and develop. Is there a balance there for Josh Heupel and his philosophy with the portal?
Well, I think every coach has to have a balance. But, it's if Josh Heupel's an offensive coach, if a big-time wide receiver's out there, is he going to turn him down? It's a great question. We'll have to see. I mean, it's got to start with need and filling those needs. But the portal's been good to Tennessee. Now, they haven't had necessarily the Jared Verse or one of those types of guys who just blew up coming out because nobody knew who Verse was coming out of Albany, right? But McCollin Castles was a really good pickup for Tennessee in the transfer portal at tight end. Tennessee doesn't win 8 games without Castles. Keenan Peely was going to be a starter before an injury. They were beyond elated where they were with that one. They've had a bunch. John Campbell steps right in from Miami. You're talking about Miami earlier and their needs on the offensive line. Well, that's a guy they had in their roster who left. He stepped right in and played at Tennessee up until the last couple of weeks when he had injury, but he stepped in and was a plug-and-play guy. So I think it's a combination of things. First of all, you got to have need. You have to address your needs. Then you're sitting there, and again, coaches don't like to get told no, so you get a little greedy from time to time, right? If you can get a toy, guys have a hard time turning those toys away. So we'll see what the next 10 days or so brings for Tennessee.
One non-portal question for you, but of course they all lead back to the portal. Guy who came to Tennessee from the portal, Joe Milton. Do we know if he's going to play in the bowl game?
We don't. He's been in the building. He's been practice. He's been working out, doing those things. I mean, Andy, he's from just outside Orlando, and you're getting ready to play in Camping World Stadium in front of all your friends and family. It's hard for me to see him not playing in this game. Now, you can argue, does it benefit him? I don't know that he could go out and play really well against Iowa, and that changes the narrative that the scouts have about him. At the same time, I don't know if he goes out and has a horrible day if that changes that narrative. I think he's got enough tape out there and tread on the tires that the NFL knows what they are, what he is, and where the shortcomings are, things they need to work on, and things they want to see from him in individual workouts, meetings, scouting combines, those types of things. But again, it's at home, when you're playing in front of your family. Now, how are coaches around the country going to keep playing these non-playoff bowl games? Is it going to be a reward for your veterans? Or are you going to have that youth movement where you play the young guys and you get a jump start on seeing where things are and build some enthusiasm and build some team things moving into the spring? That's a new dynamic with opt-outs, and that's a new thing that you're looking at with all these midterm guys coming to practice. And do you turn this into very much about youth in the bowl game? and maybe your veterans, get a smaller victory lap instead of a 4-quarter victory lap. I think these are just all things coaches are dealing with now. That wasn't the case 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world we're living in right now with the portal and opting out of bowl games and conference realignment. But all that to say, I'm sure things are going to get crazy regardless of what Tennessee is doing with the transfer portal here in the next, couple of weeks. But Brent, we appreciate you making time, and we'll visit again soon.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Awesome, Brent. Best in the business. A lot of conference realignment going on, Andy, from the SEC to the Big Ten. What do you say we pivot from the SEC to Lincoln, Nebraska?
All right.
Talk to our friend from Husker Online, Sean Callahan. Sean, a lot going on, man. How's your Portal Monday going? What's going on with Nebraska?
Well, considering a year ago, the last 2 years, it's been wild for Nebraska. They've had just one scholarship entry here on opening day, a tight end, Jake Applegate, who's a reserve guy that played, I think, 26 snaps this year. So nothing significant. But, I mean, you go back to what's happened the last couple of years. I mean, think about a year ago at this time. Matt Rule brought in 47 high school players and portal players for official visits in December and January alone. So it was bound to be a little bit slower this year because Nebraska just doesn't have the numbers right now to do much more than what they have.
So, Sean, I think the biggest question is quarterback. Obviously, they brought in Jeff Sims. Chubba Purdy was a transfer from Florida State. It didn't look like they had the answer at quarterback last year. We heard Matt Rule talking about what the going rate is for a good quarterback. Are they going to be a shopper in that market?
Well, we know this. Like, they visited Will Howard in Manhattan, Kansas on Saturday, as did Lincoln Riley. And on Friday, Wisconsin, by the way, they're definitely in the market for a quarterback, as they were there as well. And Miami was there. So Nebraska has at least made a public courtship already of Will Howard. And, I do think they're going to go after somebody. They have the ability to pay for a quarterback with their collective. It's a matter of really what Rule's vision is for that room and that position. Does he think Chubba Purdy's got a chance to be the guy? Heinrich Harburg's still going to return, and most assume that Jeff Sims probably will move on, but it's not a guarantee at this point. But yeah, they went in all in a year ago with Jeff Sims. I mean, that was their pick. Collins, the coach of Georgia Tech, is a former Matt Rule, Marcus Satterfield colleague, and they thought they had a good read on Jeff Sims, and it obviously kind of turned the entire year one around for Matt Rule. Nebraska went 5-7. They were a team that easily could have won 7 or 8 games, as you guys know, and the quarterback play leading the nation with 31 turnovers as an offense was just painful to watch at times.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the quarterback position, anytime you have a number like that in the turnover department, obviously the quarterback's going to probably have his fair share and his responsibility in that. Is there other positions of need, though, that you're looking at specifically on the offensive side of the ball for Nebraska?
Yeah, I see 3 things they're looking at. Obviously, they're looking at a quarterback. I think a wide receiver makes sense, a veteran, proven guy. And then on defense, there is a hole at linebacker. But right now, I mean, they've taken 10 to 15 portal guys each of the last 2 years on scholarship. I see the number being closer to 3-ish in that range this year, mainly because of the numbers right now. Today, right now, without knowing some more attrition that's going to play out, Nebraska is already sitting at around 100 players on scholarship when you count the high school kids that they have already, the 26 kids that will join the program and the players that will leave. It was an extremely small senior class, which I think that's the case for a lot of teams around college football. It's very, very difficult now with the transfer portal for guys to even make it to their senior year on a team when you factor in that COVID year. But the number situation for Nebraska is real. Matt Rule's vision to this program is taking a lot of high school guys and building it brick by brick, and having guys kind of earn NIL and play into NIL versus maybe overpaying for an unproven high school guy that you're going to have to go all in for, but he may not even start. And it was never more evident this year in the Big Ten Conference. We saw very few true freshmen or even redshirt freshmen this year in this league make an impact. The finalists or the winner for the freshman of the year was a safety for Purdue that really wasn't a high profile recruit at all. So it tells you it's really difficult for young guys to play in the Big Ten right now, especially when you got kids coming like Casey Thompson's coming back for his 7th year of college football at Florida Atlantic. And like Luke Fickell said, he goes, what are we even playing anymore? Is this college football? Because it is extremely hard for young freshmen to come in and play. And I think the priority is retention of your own roster and then finding those 2 or 3 portal pieces to help bring you over the top.
Well, if you're Matt Rule, do you adjust the way you want to do things based on what you're seeing in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I think this league humbles a lot of good coaches. I mean, Scott Frost, for all accounts, was a good coach, and he realized what he wanted to do and what he did before wouldn't work in this league. I mean, look how good Michigan is, and they barely went for 200 yards on Iowa. I mean, the style of game in this league, at least right now in this current state, is a lot different, especially when you take Scott Frost, Paul Christ and his offensive mind out of the league, and Jeff Brom. I mean, those 3 guys are probably the 3 best offensive minds in the Big Ten. They're gone, and you saw what it did for defenses in this league last year. They were better than ever. The stats did not lie. I mean, Nebraska's defense was ranked 14th in the country, but they were still probably middle of the pack in the Big Ten. I mean, there was just that many good defenses, that many poor offenses where you better be able to situationally run the ball in this league, and you better be able to situationally pick up 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s, and play field position, because points and possessions are at a premium right now in the Big Ten.
And the portal and NIL kind of seem to go hand in hand when it comes to building a roster. And Matt Rule made his, thoughts known, or his insight known rather, on what a quarterback is going right now for in the transfer portal. Where is Nebraska situated when it comes to their resources in the NIL department?
Well, I mean, they have a pretty strong collective. It's funded by the Pede family, who is, by all intents and purposes, the largest boosters of the program. But it was a spinoff of their first collective, ABM. It's called 1890. And they have the ability to do whatever Matt Rule wants to do. It's a matter of they follow the vision of what Matt Rule wants. I don't believe Matt Rule thinks it's right to go give a high school kid $800,000. I don't. I think he made a comment this week when he was in the NFL. Bill Polian said, you never want to have a free agent come into your locker room and make more money than your entire locker room. And that was kind of his way of saying, like, we're not just going to pay somebody that's unproven big dollars more than, say, a Ty Robinson or a Nash Hutmacher because of their recruiting market at that moment in time. But I do obviously think there is a place for it. And quarterback is where it starts. I think he said what he said this week to let people know this is what we're probably going to have to spend to get a quarterback that would check all the boxes for what we want. But he's also kind of made it known he'd like a quarterback that could be here for 2 years or more. Will Howard is only a 1-year guy. Sam Leavitt from Michigan State, I think that's a sleeper name to watch right now too. He was a 4-star guy that looked really, really good, played 4 games for the Spartans this year with the coaching transition, went in the portal officially today. I mean, there's some names like that too. So will they try to go for that Will Howard, the totally proven route, or will they try to get a guy like a Sam Leavitt style that would come in and really have to compete against Cheva Purdy and Heinrich Harburg and win the job in the spring?
Do you think, Sean, that he said that to potentially smoke out anybody who might be on the fence about entering the portal? Like, hey, we may be in the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, look at Kyle McCord going in today. I mean, and Dillon Gabriel. I mean, it's wild. I mean, you can find a good quarterback in the portal, and there's going to be a lot of guys like McCord and like Gabriel that continue to enter the portal. I think somebody joked, he goes, there are going to be 80 quarterbacks in this portal that are good quarterbacks. And I don't think that's that far off. I mean, that is going to be probably the deepest position we've seen. And it's only been open for a few hours. And look how many quality names and options you have. You got to pick right. I mean, that was what the problem was. I mean, last year, Nebraska went all in on Jeff Sims. They brought him the Big Ten Media Days. He earned the prestigious single-digit jersey that Matt Rule and the players vote on to the leaders of the team. He had billboards for John Deere tractors, and he had an Amigos combo meal named after him at a Mexican fast food chain called the Jeff Sims Combo. It came with a soft shell taco and a crisp meat burrito.
And a fumble. Oh, wait, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, it was the Jeff Sims combo that, it came with a few turtle, but it was a colossal miss that really kind of changed the trajectory of this season for Nebraska, where they were gifted one of their more favorable schedules in years. And next year, if you guys look at the schedule, it's not that bad either. I mean, they got a real opportunity to at least get to a bowl game next year. They should have been to a bowl game this year. And I think that's the most frustrating thing, that They blew it at Michigan State. They mismanaged the end of Maryland, and they arguably mismanaged the end of the Wisconsin game by allowing it to go to overtime instead of having maybe a couple extra plays to win that game. And they couldn't find one win in those 3 opportunities. And the Minnesota game, obviously, to start the year was a similar game. They lost 3 games this year, 13-10, all by last-second field goals.
Yeah, there's it feels like Nebraska from a roster perspective is right there. And maybe sometimes it is that just 1 or 2 portal guys that put you over the top at some key moments. But regardless, we'll watch what Nebraska and Matt Rule do in the portal. Sean, appreciate all your time. Enjoy the rest of your Portal Monday.
Hey, guys, have fun today. Great job. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I feel like we get told that a lot. Hey, have fun. It is legitimately free agency, which in my opinion is pretty fun when it comes to checking the Twitter sphere.
The difference in this kind of free agency and the pro sports free agency is who has an expiring contract in pro sports.
Yep.
Like this, we don't know who's gonna be in or out. Like I woke up this morning and a few minutes after I get up, I'm going to get some coffee and bam, Kyle McCord's in the portal. Like really?
Yeah, and that was the exact same thought I had seeing Kyle McCord, and then you hear about Dillon Gabriel and all these other names, and I'm sure there's going to be more big names that jump in there, but I think what you just said is a perfect tee up into the next thing we want to talk about. There's some guys that you don't know they're jumping into the portal unless maybe you get in their ear with mom and dad or a trainer.
Unless you maybe already knew.
A little tampering going on. Which is, I mean, if you don't think tampering is happening in college football, you're kidding yourself.
Yeah.
Andy, there's tampering and there's probably some loopholes to tampering.
Mm-hmm.
What are some ways that happens that are technically legal that make it, doable that you're hearing about?
Well, the coaches love to complain about tampering, but never actually accuse anybody of tampering because they would all like to reserve the right to tamper.
Sure.
So here's the problem. It's almost impossible to catch someone tampering. Like you would have to be so colossally stupid to get caught tampering that it's probably never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, like you'd have to have a position coach or a coordinator like texting the player or the player's parents directly. Hey, would you consider coming here? Like they're never going to do that. Never.
Yeah.
There are layers and layers upon layers to this. And here's the thing to remember. In high school recruiting, everybody's got a guy. Everybody's got a guy. Whether it is mom, dad, high school coach, speed trainer,
mm-hmm.
quarterback trainer, there's somebody that you go through and you can get a message to that person. So let's say that person signs with school X and you work for school B. During that player's freshman year at school X, if you think they're not happy or you see that they're not playing, but you really like them in recruiting, you can get a message to whoever that player's person was. And you can send it through a lower level recruiting staffer of yours. You can call a coach in the area who happens to be around all this person a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And they can say, so-and-so from school B was saying they might be in the market.
Yeah.
And so you can pass that message along through a number of channels. Now, with NIL, you have the other piece of it, which is more like what we've seen in the NFL or the NBA or whatever, where these guys have agents. Like instead of a person acting as their agent, whether that's mom, dad, high school coach, quarterback trainer, whatever, they just have a legit agent.
Mm-hmm.
And you just call that person. Like you calling that agent is not tampering because that agent has many, many clients. He may have clients on your team.
Interesting.
So, and a phone call that isn't recorded, it just says you called this phone number.
Mm-hmm.
You can't prove squat.
Interesting. I mean, how rampant is this? Because it feels like
100%.
with how easy it would be, is it like 90% or north? Is it
100%.
Like 100%? Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. So every player jumping in the portal is a high profile name. There's been some back channels.
No, okay. I thought you meant schools.
Sorry,
100% of schools are doing it.
Yes.
No, there are some players who just I'm interested in entering the portal. I'm interested in seeing what's out there that maybe have not been tampered with.
Okay.
But a lot of those players, the highest profile ones, they may already know where they're going, or they've at least had their agent test the waters and float out there. Hey, if my guy went in, would you guys potentially be interested? If my guy, and then he's going to call another school. If my guy went in, is he somebody you might want to consider? And so they get a gauge of the marketplace before they go in.
which feels like a smart idea as long as you're able to keep it above board. Because, I mean, you want to know what your market is for yourself, correct?
Yeah,
you want to help you as much as possible.
You
More
can't
information is
keep.
good.
I mean, you're officially the coach who says to the agent, "Yeah, we're interested," is tampering,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't prove it.
Right. Very fascinating.
Yeah.
The whole thing is so fascinating because in the modern age of college football, with so much player mobility, with NIL, it seems like that is becoming something that might have to be regulated next. If you can, like, is that something that we end up
There's
saying,
nothing
hey,
they
it's
can do.
happening, we're going to have to just put this all above board somehow?
How would you regulate it? Like,
I don't know.
That's the problem. Is there's too many layers involved. It's too easy, and it's actually. I mean, you think about the college football world, coaching world, recruiting world. It's a small world, relatively speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows everybody.
Mm.
It's too easy to just pass a message. You can pass a message through 3 different people, and it'll get where it needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is not a problem.
It's curious because it felt like to me there was a point in time where everybody knew payers were getting played to some degree, but kind of same thing.
Yeah.
Couldn't really prove it, or
Yeah.
you didn't want to prove it.
Yeah.
I wonder if the future of tampering is headed towards that kind of world.
Well, the future of tampering is like the future of all of the rest of this.
Hmm.
Like, we can have a much bigger picture discussion. Eventually, they're going to be employees. There's going to be a collective bargaining agreement. They'll have contracts. And so it'll be the same as the NBA and the NFL. You'll be able to have very serious penalties for tampering.
Hmm.
And you can call like within the terms of your CBA, you can call tampering whatever you want as long as everybody agrees to it.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
so that's a different story. Once that comes in, this all calms down because somebody's under contract. You're not going to mess with somebody who's under contract. Like, you see how careful NFL coaches get when they get asked about a player who everybody knows is in the last year of his deal.
Mhm.
And they're like, I don't know if I can say anything about this guy right now.
Hmm.
And so it would be the same thing in college football once that happens. Now, when will that happen? We don't know.
Yeah.
It definitely seems to be heading that direction.
Yeah, the game is evolving, it seems like, by the minute with the playoff expanding, with conference realignment, with the portal, with NIL. And one of those schools, speaking of realignment, that will be in a new conference next year is USC. And we've already talked about a couple of potential quarterbacks they might be in the market for. Where do you think things stand for USC right now as Lincoln Riley and company head to the Big Ten?
Well, they add a new defensive coordinator, D'Anton Lynn.
Mhm.
And my question with that is, how seriously is Lincoln Riley going to take playing defense? Because Lynn did a good job at UCLA, and stealing him from your crosstown and new, old and new conference rival.
Yeah.
Pretty good job. But unless Lincoln Riley is going to take defense seriously, allow them to practice in a way that allows them to be physical and tackle well, it's not going to matter.
Hmm.
And it's going to be especially exposed playing some of the teams they have to play in the Big Ten. So they have to do better at that. They have to upgrade the talent on the roster, on defense, and on the offensive line. Again, we keep coming back to that. I feel like that's what we said with Florida. That's what we said. I don't know that USC is going to be very good next year.
Hmm.
They have to figure out how to do the impossible, which is create a good offensive line that can compete against the best teams in the Big Ten with what they got. Now, perhaps they have some young players that they just need to develop that might be able to fit the bill. But like we were talking about earlier, there are only so many of those bodies around.
Mhm.
There are only so many of those huge people who move that well.
Yeah.
And they, for the most part, go to Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State.
Yep.
They go to some other, like some of them go to Michigan.
Yep.
But for the most part, those 3 schools get almost all of them.
Yeah.
And you got to figure out how to get some of those guys. Texas has figured out, like Kelvin Banks is one of those guys.
Mhm.
You got to be able to get some of those guys.
Got to be able
if
to have
you're
the
USC.
big people. And the concern, I guess you would say, for USC is, well, hey, it's probably not getting much better at the quarterback position than Caleb Williams.
It's not. That's
it's gonna be
they're gonna.
interesting.
Well, whoever they get, even if they were to get Dillon Gabriel,
Yeah.
or Riley Leonard or Will Howard, who the 3 best we've said in this particular market,
Mhm.
they're a downgrade from Caleb Williams.
Is there a guy, though, that you think, hey, plug him into USC, he gives you the best chance if other pieces elevate? I mean, Cam Ward makes sense. Dillon Gabriel, number 1 player for on 3. Riley Leonard, if they were to be somehow in the sweepstakes for him, is there like an ideal fit for USC? Hey, if you land this guy, maybe good things can happen.
I think Dillon Gabriel, with his skill set, could be good in that offense. Now, we haven't seen him playing in that offense, but we've seen him playing in kind of a cousin to that offense. And I think he'd be very good. I think, his ability to run and improvise is something that we've seen in Lincoln Riley's offense is incredibly valuable. We saw it with Kyler Murray. We saw it with Caleb Williams, and to a degree with Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that is important because he is a much better runner than people give him credit. Go to the Texas game this year. Look at Dillon Gabriel against Texas.
That last drive.
Absolutely. And so you let him get – sometimes when he gets outside of structure, he's even better.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that would be very interesting to put him with Lincoln Riley, who clearly is great at coaching quarterbacks and at developing quarterbacks, even if he doesn't have them for very, very long. I mean, look at Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the difference between Jalen Hurts' when last we saw him in Alabama and what he was at Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be really interesting. Like if they were to get Dillon Gabriel, of course, if you're Dillon Gabriel, you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, but I can go play for the coach who I've just played with the whole time if I go to Mississippi State. And I realize if you're a USC fan, you're going, what are you even talking about here?
Yeah.
But that's a legitimate concern when you're Dillon Gabriel and you're looking ahead. And also, let's not forget, Dillon Gabriel still pondering the idea of going to the NFL.
Yep.
It's not cut and dry that he winds up in college.
Yeah. And I mean, to your credit, or to that same situation as well, be at Mississippi State, play in the SEC, be able to show scouts like, hey, I can do this against the best of the best.
He was already going to play in the SEC.
But, I mean, I guess you. I mean,
Jackson Arnold may have had something to say about that. That's that's the question.
That'll be fun.
And really, that's the part that I think is interesting with this clock and these, because you run into situations, and I go back to the original one of these, and Tom O'Brien gets crushed for this, and he did pick wrong. But when Russell Wilson left NC State to go to Wisconsin, people forgot that Mike Glennon had also just graduated. So they could both leave. So Tom O'Brien had to decide, who does he want? I think Mike Glennon had one more year of eligibility than Russell Wilson did. And O'Brien didn't like Russell Wilson playing baseball too. And so he picks Mike Glennon. Terrible decision, obviously. Yeah. Worked out great for Wisconsin. But,
long neck.
But
very long neck for Mike Glennon.
Yeah.
Good neck on the guy.
Everybody wants Russell Wilson in this market. There's not a lot of those out there.
Doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it.
But it does feel like there are these decisions being made now because of the COVID year between a young guy and an old guy. And I think you cut the old guy loose if you think the young guy is even close, because you want to you're going to lose the young guy. Like if you are Oklahoma, your question is, would you rather lose Jackson Arnold or Dillon Gabriel? If you're Kansas State, your question is, would you rather lose Avery Johnson or Will Howard? Like these are the questions you have to ask.
Yeah. And like you said, when it comes to the quarterback market, if you don't land one of those guys, by nature of how USC is going after guys in the portal, that makes me nervous about how they feel what they have in house. Like I don't know if you want to necessarily,
Well, I think USC has told us exactly.
It feels that way.
Lincoln Riley has, without saying a word, telegraphed exactly how he feels about the quarterbacks on his roster.
So if they don't get a transfer portal quarterback, it sounds like regardless they're concerned about USC, but they need to be active in this portal cycle and get one of those top guys.
Well, they also need to get whoever the top offensive lineman is. But the problem is, like we just said about Florida, they need to get whoever the top offensive lineman is. There's a lot of schools that Auburn needs to get whoever the top offensive lineman is. It's not going to be easy to get that person.
And if you have the top offensive lineman, then how am I going to get the top offensive lineman?
That's exactly right.
Just by nature of the arithmetic of it all. Well, USC obviously has college football playoff aspirations. That'll get easier because they'll have more spots, but it'll get harder because they're in the Big Ten. So it's kind of this interesting spot. The portal obviously will have an impact on the college football playoff. Andy, the rankings came out yesterday. You and I were sitting in this exact spot a few hours ago this time yesterday, or as 3 hours from now this time yesterday. And the portal had an impact on some of these teams that made the college football playoff. So let's kind of take a look at some of those teams and how active they were from a season ago. You had Washington, Michigan, Texas, and obviously you had Alabama there. Texas, surprisingly, lost double-digit guys last season, only added about 5 transfers. What does that say about Texas being able to be
they got rid of the guys they didn't want?
Specific for how they want, and also probably guys that aren't going to hit the field, saying, "Hey, we're not going to see the field. We're too talented here."
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Is they felt like they had some young depth, which they did, and they also felt like, okay, there's only a few spots that we really feel like we can upgrade. And you heard Bobby Bird, the punter.
Yeah,
that's a good one. But A.D. Mitchell feels like the best addition maybe that they made.
Yeah.
Coming from Georgia, he'd made some big catches at Georgia, and then he really, because they were already an offense that had a multitude of weapons, but just adding one more to make it really a pick your poison situation, I think was critical for them.
Yeah, and the impact he had, how many big time catches? Like against Alabama alone, it was like Xavier Worthy, he's going off in the first half. Second half, we're going to try and take him away. Adonai Mitchell hits you for a deep touchdown to ultimately kind of put the fork in it. And so being able to be, it seems like a lot of these teams are just really surgical in how they do approach the portal, not necessarily going with the overhaul, but going more so, we're going to add these couple of teams here.
Michigan and Alabama have been great at it in finding the guys who matter. Alabama, I think the most impactful transfer on their roster right now is not somebody who transferred in this year. It's Jermaine Burton, who transferred in last year from Georgia. And watching him play really well against Georgia in the SEC championship game on Saturday. I mean, what if he was at Georgia? Because Georgia was banged up. Like, Ladd McConkey was banged up. Some of the receivers at Georgia were banged up. What if Jermaine Burton still played for Georgia right now?
Yeah. And I mean, two of those teams, both Washington and Texas, we touched on it earlier, both playing transfer portal quarterbacks.
Absolutely.
And in Alabama, it sounded like at least a season ago, well, they did get a transfer portal quarterback.
And Washington, like Dillon Johnson.
It's
a great example. Mississippi State transfer. Like they've got, there are so many guys that have found new life in the transfer portal. And Michael Penix is a great example of this. Nobody in Indiana was mad at Michael Penix. It wasn't that they didn't think he could play. He'd had 3 season-ending injuries, and it felt wrong at that point. Like the juju was bad, and he needed a fresh start. And look at what happened.
He's been phenomenal. He'll probably be in New York City for the Heisman Trophy. Very, very interesting spot we find ourselves in. Now, out of that whole list, Michigan actually took the most transfers, having 10 guys through the portal added to their roster. Andy, I know they've been active in the portal to a degree. I was surprised to see them be the most active of these college football playoff teams with the way they worked on the offensive and defensive line, obviously. But they've had some guys that have contributed for them in the secondary, Josh Wallace being one of them. What he's done transferring over from UMass, a school that, you don't necessarily talk a ton about outside of Victor Cruz when it comes to being, a place that produces elite talent. Michigan seems like one of those places that not just gets guys by nature of these numbers, but also develops them in-house and puts them in really good position to succeed.
Yeah, I think their scouting of the portal is excellent. I mean, Ladarius Henderson is a great example of that. He's a guy who played at Arizona State as a true freshman, 17 years old, having to play against like 23-year-old monsters for Utah. And he got balanced between tackle and guard. It never felt like he could get right at Arizona State, but they saw the talent there. They saw the same stuff that Arizona State had seen when they recruited him out of the Dallas area, and he just plugs right in at left tackle. It makes a huge think about how important when he went out, when he didn't play against Maryland, they couldn't block.
Yeah, they struggled. I
mean, it was not good. AJ Barner's another one, tight end who came from Indiana.
Sneaky.
So there was a point in the Ohio State game where Colton Loveland went out, and Barner comes in and makes a catch immediately and gets him a first down. Like that, having that level of depth, you don't have if you didn't go get him.
It seems like these schools that are just good at everything are also good at the portal. Like well-run organizations, well-run businesses don't have a ton of weaknesses across the board. And you're seeing the same thing with the college football playoff teams and the way they utilize the portal. Let's look at some of the just contenders, maybe even for next year, Andy. Not just the teams that made the playoff this year, but teams that have playoff aspirations and were in the hunt this year. Georgia being one of those teams. Ohio State being one of those teams. Oregon. When it comes to maybe what they need to do in the portal, any team that jumps out and say, hey, they're just this piece away.
Well, apparently Ohio State needs a quarterback.
That's the way it looks. Yeah.
So that's one.
Yeah.
That's
a pretty
big
good one. That's a good one.
I think Ohio State might look on the offensive line a little bit, especially if you look at what Michigan's done. Like I just mentioned Ladarius Henderson, Drake Nugent's another example at Michigan. Like Michigan has been able to make sure they have a solid offensive line at all times with the mixture of, and Ohio State obviously has a lot of good young players that they got out of high school. But perhaps there's a spot where somebody's just not quite ready yet, and you might need to get that one-year guy and bring him in. And look at what you have to sell. Because you can say you play well here, your draft stock's going to be through the roof.
Yep.
You get a chance to play for championships. You get the best of the best. This is
Play with great
the
wide
highest level
receivers.
competition.
Yeah.
You're going to play against absolute monsters at practice every day that'll make you better. I think it's a lot to sell, and they need to sell it the way Michigan has sold it the last couple of years.
Without question. And Michigan is kind of the school that I would pick out of that group. To, if JJ McCarthy does decide he wants to go and play professionally next year, and it sounds like he'll have, some choices here in terms of how high he could be taking the NFL draft. I wonder if Michigan's going to be in the market for a transfer portal quarterback, Andy. Dante Moore, a name that got thrown out there. I'm wondering if we won't see them thrown out there a little bit more. But they're not that spread. Come put up big numbers here. It's like, hey, come be in our system. And win.
But if JJ McCarthy's going pro, it's because he's going to be a fairly high draft pick, and that is a very good selling point. Like the NFL people love JJ McCarthy. They love him. They feel like he can operate an NFL offense. They like that he has operated an offense that is similar to something that they run. I do think that is a selling point if you're in the market for a transfer portal quarterback. Is hey. The NFL teams would like to see you running this kind of offense. So come run this kind of offense.
Yeah. And speaking of quarterbacks as well, kind of staying in that vein, Oregon feels like they're also, if they were able to land the right guy, able to kind of keep what they have rolling under Dan Lanning right at where it's been operating at, which is, conference title level, even going to the Big Ten.
If you are a high accuracy dual threat guy, Dillon Gabriel, then Oregon, why wouldn't you want to play in that offense?
Yeah.
There's so many weapons around you. They put lots of good offensive linemen in front of you. I mean, they've got multiple NFL offensive linemen who be playing in front of you. And they're going to put you in a position to succeed based on what we've seen with Bo Nix. Dillon Gabriel has so many options at this point. But I think for him, if he just wants to put up the massive numbers and like Oregon and Mississippi State, probably the places you'd go for that.
Yeah.
If he wants to kind of see how much more he can do, maybe go get coached by Lincoln Riley and do that. The more I look at it, the more I think he may have the best options of anybody in the portal.
A lot of people will be recruiting his services without a doubt. And it sounds like there's already a few in the sweepstakes for one Dillon Gabriel. Andy, I'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention the team that was number one in the country for the majority of the season, Georgia Bulldogs. Maybe not in the portal quarterback market, but it feels like at the receiver position they could be able to elevate there. And Dominic Lovett transfer from Missouri this year.
Thomas from Mississippi State.
Feels like there are a couple of skill players, maybe not away, but just that they might be in the market for that. Anything that sticks out to you for the Dogs, they might be looking to add.
I'm curious on the offensive line because they're going to lose a lot of guys to the NFL. Now they've got, again, that's one where you've always got talent there. And they may just be able to move those guys up. But if there's a position, again, like I was saying with what Michigan does, where you feel like somebody's not quite ready yet and maybe need another year of seasoning, that's someone who was a true freshman last year and you'd like to kind of have them be a starter in their third year, then maybe you go find somebody. And that's another place where you have an easy sell.
Yes.
It's a very, like if you find a very competent either lower tier Power 5 or Group of 5 starter, maybe like an all-conference Group of 5 type player in the position that you need, that's a plug-and-play type situation that I think would work really well for them.
And be able to go to a place like Georgia, get developed, play against the best. And a lot of these guys, especially at the G5 level, it seems like go and have NFL aspirations, and going to a place like Georgia probably catapults you pretty nicely. Well, Andy, we're kind of wrapping up here on the first day of the transfer portal. Before we do that, though, we got more news from Josh.
Oh, boy.
Josh, what's going on, man?
I was going to make another appearance before the end of the show.
I could feel it.
Well, we got news. The number 1 wide receiver from the 2020 class, the number 3 overall player from the 2020 class, Ohio State wide receiver Julian Fleming, has entered his name into the transfer portal.
Wow.
Wow.
On the heels of us talking about Ohio State. So Ohio State now probably not in the market for a wide receiver, but I mean, how big a loss is this to lose someone who is as highly recruited as he was? And also Brian Hartline, with how well he's developed that wide receiver position, you don't see a lot of wide receivers leave Ohio State.
Especially when you have a role.
Yes.
Julian Fleming had a role at Ohio State.
He was a guy that you saw on the field a fair amount, and you would imagine that role would only grow with the departure of a Marvin Harrison Jr.
and Emeka Egbuka. Now Jeremiah Smith's coming in, and Jeremiah Smith is special. But that said, that I don't think that's Julian Fleming going, I'm not going to be wide receiver 1 here, so I'm out. Like if you're wide receiver 3 at Ohio State, you're still playing in the NFL.
You wonder if it was a thing where if Kyle McCord was essentially told in a transparent conversation, hey, we appreciate all you've done.
Yeah.
It may not be the situation you want it to be here. You wonder if this was kind of the day they had those conversations with
right.
guys
And
across
do
the
they
board.
have something else cooked up? Like,
Yep.
do they go and this is outside of our tampering conversation. I'm not suggesting anything because Ohio State can literally go out and say, we're in the market for receivers. Look at the receivers we've put in the NFL. And that will draw people into the transfer portal.
Yeah.
That will, everybody will want that.
And I do wonder, too, if it's a thing where they'll be in that market or if they're just like, hey, we got Noah Rogers, Brandon Ennis, Carnell Tate.
And that may be it.
Guys.
That Carnell Tate looked like he's going to be very good.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Jeremiah Smith's coming.
Yeah.
I think that makes a big difference.
It's going to be wild to watch because I truly believe, Andy, if I know our luck, we'll get off the air here and somebody massive will jump into the portal. So we'll give them a few more minutes to do that. If you're thinking about jumping in, you got a few more minutes to do that. Let's look ahead to the next window because we got this portal window here that's been shrunk from 45 to 30 days. December 4th, obviously today, closes January 2nd of 2024. Then you get to that spring window, Andy, and that's only a 15-day window. So right around the end of spring practice, guys like Keon Coleman from a season ago, Peyton Thorne from a season ago, going to jump in there. The transfer portal calendar as a whole, I guess my big question here is what's next for some of these guys that are maybe on the fence if they don't jump in this window?
So look at players who are in systems with first-year coaches or in programs with first-year coaches because maybe they just don't get along or they find out they don't like the scheme or the coach decides they don't like the player
for the scheme.
All of those things. Those will be the guys that are going to hop in. Look for guys who lose quarterback competitions. They're going to hop in. Now, you also, at this point, now they can leverage a choice in a quarterback competition. I think that's probably what happened at Ohio State with Haskins and Burrow. Burrow wanted an answer. And when they didn't give him an answer, he's like, I got to go. I think you saw it with Michigan State last year with Peyton Thorne and Noah Kim. Mel Tucker hadn't named Noah Kim the starter, but seemed to be leaning that way. And Peyton Thorne's like, all right, if you're not going to tell me I'm the starter, I'm out.
Yeah.
And he winds up at Auburn. So I think you're going to see that. You'll see some of these leverage plays by quarterbacks as they say, listen, I need to know because I don't want to sit around all summer and then you're going to give it to the other guy and just bench me.
Yeah. It's a very interesting spot we're at right now because this is this is that time of year where if you're a player, you have, a little bit of leverage on your side as well. Well, hey, if I don't like the way spring practice is going, I'm running with the 2s instead of the 1s, and I think I should be with the 1s. Maybe I'll put my name in the portal. Now, this window has changed a little bit. This calendar is kind of still shuffling the deck on us. Do you think we'll stick with this? Do you think we'll see some changes here sooner rather than later as pertains to this portal calendar?
I think they've constricted it as much as they can, and they needed to. It was a little bit wild. Now, remember, it's not about when you sign. It's about when you go into the portal. Once you're in the portal, you don't have to sign until you could sign the day before practice starts. But you need to be in the portal to be able to be contacted by everybody else. So you have to decide, hey, I want to do this. So that's the decision you have to make. Because remember, you can go back to your old school if you enter the portal, but they are under no obligation to take you back.
Which it sounds like maybe that was a situation you saw with like a Spencer Sanders from last year with the Oklahoma State deal. I mean, the whole thing is wild. College football as a whole right now is wild. Transfer Portal Monday has shown itself to be wild so far with Kyle McCord, Dillon Gabriel, both putting their names into the transfer portal.
Oh, man.
To stay up with everything, one, subscribe here to the On3 YouTube channel. Would encourage you to follow the On3 social channels, including Pete Nakos, Hayes Fawcett, Andy Staples.
Well, and
across the board.
Also, we have a transfer portal channel.
Yes, we do.
At transfer portal _.
Yep.
And it is it's popping. It's popping.
It's like watching the ticker. All the big news will be there. So make sure you get locked in on all those channels and all those platforms. And we appreciate y'all being with us today on this Transfer Portal Monday. Buckle up, grab a helmet, whatever you need, because it's about to get a little bit bumpy here for this portal season. We appreciate y'all tuning in. For myself, Andy Staples, Josh Newberg, all of us here at On3, we will see y'all next time.